Is it possible for a contract to become true love? In the dim light of a glass-enclosed boardroom in downtown New York, Ethan Hayes, CEO of the iconic cosmetics brand Hayes Beauty, faced the stern faces of his board of directors. A glow of Manhattan's lights illuminated the windows behind him. But the meeting had a somber tone, and Ethan felt the weight of every gaze fixed on him. The afternoon's conversation had a single topic: the image of stability that the company needed to present to European investors. A huge opportunity awaited Hayes Beauty in France, where the beauty market was buzzing with possibilities. But Ethan needed to convince investors that he was not just a cool, brilliant young executive, but also a man of traditional, stable values. The fact is, you need a solid family structure to build trust. Ethan, said the voice of Barry, the most veteran and skeptical counselor, family is security, and someone who's single and as independent as you might not seem like the safest bet. Ethan absorbed every word with a stoic expression. The pressure on him was familiar. His relentless focus and mastery over his career had propelled him to the top, but it had also isolated him. The marriage proposal seemed ridiculous, an invasive demand that sounded almost like a joke, but he knew it was real. He knew the council wanted answers, and for him, there was only one viable answer: a sham marriage. That same night, after hours of meetings, Ethan found himself over a drink at a gala reception, feeling the weight of the decision he would need to make. If he wanted to keep the company at the top, he would have to adhere to the absurd plan and find a wife, even if only on paper. He was deep in thought when he felt something collide with his shoulder, a sudden impact that took him out of his reverie. "Hey, watch where you're going." The indignant female voice made him look up in irritation. The woman in front of him seemed as surprised as he was. She wore a simple dress, but with details that exuded personality. Her brown hair was tied up in an unpretentious way, with a few strands escaping, giving her a carefree look. He looked at her with a sharp and calculating look, but the young woman, apparently, was not easily intimidated. "You should apologize," she snapped, crossing her arms. Ethan let out a sigh, feeling a little ridiculous for even paying attention to the incident. "Should I?" he replied in a dry tone. "You were the one who bumped into me." She seemed to assess his face for a moment, perhaps realizing she was in front of someone important, but that didn't stop her from keeping her chin up. "You were halfway there and looked more lost than a kid in a park. I suggest you take your eyes off the walls and watch where you're going." The answer took him by surprise. Very few people had the courage to speak to him like that, even less in public. There was something about her that disarmed him, a fearless, almost infuriating honesty. He half smiled and replied, in a sarcastic tone, "I appreciate the suggestion. I just hope next time you'll be a little more careful." They exchanged intense glances for a second, until she seemed to lose interest and simply walked away without looking back. Ethan didn't know her name, nor did he remember where she came from, but her image stayed in his mind. It seemed unlikely that he would see her again, but something about that brief interaction piqued his curiosity. Days later, Ethan still found himself thinking about that sassy girl from the event. The decision to find a temporary wife was pressing on him, and he knew that if he wanted to meet the deadline, he would need to act quickly. It was then that, on a casual visit to a Brooklyn cafe, fate brought the annoying girl back into his path. She was sitting at one of the tables, her face focused on a sketch in her notebook, with brushes and paints scattered around her. Ethan, initially reluctant, watched her from a distance, debating whether he should get closer or whether it was better to move on. But something in his attitude compelled him to go there. As he approached, he made a point of pretending to be slightly disinterested, but he got straight to the point, bluntly. "You're the girl at the party." She looked up, slightly confused, until she recognized him. "The arrogant CEO," she replied with a brief smile, as if the memory of the encounter was somewhat irritating to her. "I see we have a very peculiar memory of each other," he replied, holding back a smile. Ethan was never one to share jokes, but something about her seemed to pull him out of his comfort zone. What started as a teasing conversation became something more direct. Ethan observed the lines in Emma's notebook, and upon realizing her talent, an unusual impulse crossed his mind. "Are you looking for a permanent project?" he asked casually, trying to appear disinterested. She laughed, almost in disbelief. "Is this a job offer from the arrogant CEO?" He shrugged, "Something like that. And I'm not arrogant. I'm just direct." Negotiations took longer than Ethan expected. Emma was independent, resisted accepting any help, and seemed to want to keep her distance from her elitist world. But at the same time, I was in a difficult situation. The bills were piling up, and his art, while incredible, wasn't exactly something that paid all the expenses. With some reluctance, she agreed to try out at Hayes Beauty as a freelance designer. As the days turned into weeks, their closeness grew in subtle ways. Emma was direct, not afraid to express her opinions, which intrigued Ethan. She brought a different energy, a spontaneity that he didn't see in his routine full of formalities and strategies. For her, the idea of life was different. Work was just a form of expression, not an obsession like it was for Ethan. But time was running out, and Ethan knew his marriage proposal needed to happen soon. He didn't want the council to suspect anything, and the idea of marrying someone from his own reality bored him deeply. Emma, with her authenticity and lack of interest in status, seemed like the perfect choice for what he needed. After a presentation of new ideas in the office, Ethan realized the time was right to make the proposal. He called her in for a private conversation with a seriousness he rarely displayed. Emma, who was used to his always direct tone, was intrigued to see the hesitation in his eyes. "Emma, I need a favor," he began, his tone lower and almost vulnerable. "It's a personal matter, and a complicated one." She raised her eyebrows, curious and slightly suspicious. "Please? From you, who don't seem to need anything." He took a deep breath, feeling the pressure of the situation. "I need you to pretend to be my wife." Emma was silent for a few seconds, clearly confused. Her face alternated between surprise and disbelief. "You're kidding." Ethan shook his head seriously. "It's a deal. I need stability to consolidate some business, and you need financial stability." The proposal was straightforward, almost brutal in its simplicity, and Ethan knew he was asking for something surreal. Emma was silent, processing the words. She knew she was in a difficult financial situation, but the idea of being involved in a scam like that scared her. She imagined the comments, what people would think, and most of all, how much it would change her life. But at the same time, it was a chance to solve his financial problems. "I know it sounds absurd," Ethan continued in a calm tone, "but the contract is clear and discreet. You receive significant financial compensation, and at the end of the 6 months, everyone moves on with their lives." The shock on Emma's face turned into a more reflective expression. She knew enough about the business world to know that temporary alliances happened all the time, but pretending to be Ethan's wife was another level of acting. Still, the proposal seemed more realistic than many other solutions he had considered for his situation. After a few minutes, Emma finally took a deep breath. "Let's say I accept," she began, hesitantly. "How would that work? Would I have to pretend to be in love with you?" Ethan smiled, surprised by the directness of the question. "Something like that. In front of others, we would have to act like a couple, convincingly." She shook her head, intrigued. "And how do I know that you won't change the conditions of this contract from one moment to the next?" He looked her in the eyes, steady. "Because I keep my promises, Emma. You have my word." The tension between them was fraught with veiled promises and unspoken expectations. Both knew that this agreement would bring complications they could not even imagine. But in that moment, Ethan's coldness was mixed with an almost reluctant empathy. Emma, in turn, realized that this rigid and inflexible man also carried something that he preferred not to let on. Finally, after a long pause, she nodded, as if she had made the most difficult decision in her life. "I accept, but with some conditions." Ethan smiled, relieved. "Perfect. Let's work out all the details." From that moment on, Emma and Ethan were intertwined on a path that, although they didn't know it yet, would profoundly change the course of their lives. Ethan's apartment was a luxurious combination of sophistication and minimalism, reflecting the CEO's impeccable and reserved taste. Upon first entering the space that would now be her temporary home, Emma felt out of place. "It was as if I were in a showroom, a place designed to be seen but not lived in." The neutral-toned walls, the impeccably polished floor, and the modern design furniture seemed designed to impress any visitor. But for Emma, they were missing something essential: warmth, life. Ethan followed her every step, observing her reactions with his analytical, expressionless gaze. "This is where you will stay for the next few months. The guest room has been prepared for you. Anything you need, the staff will be on hand." "Team?" she asked, raising an eyebrow, trying not to show her discomfort. "You mean there are people hanging around here all the time?" He nodded, as if the fact were the most common thing in the world. "Assistants, housekeeper, some security staff. They know about our deal, so there will be no surprises." Emma tried to hide her surprise and slight discomfort. Living with a retinue of employees around was not part of his reality, but before he could reflect on it any further, Ethan started talking about the rules of coexistence and got straight to the point. "Our agreement must be objective and functional. We need to present the image of a stable and united couple without emotional interference. In front of others, yes, we will be the perfect couple. In private, we are mere companions. Limits are essential." She listened to him attentively, but couldn't resist a brief, sarcastic laugh. "And you really believe we can simply control emotions? It seems like a foolproof plan. I've never seen anyone fool themselves." Ethan, however, kept his gaze serious, as if her every word was a test he needed to pass. "It's not about deceiving yourself, Emma. It's about having control. Control over ourselves. That's something I can maintain without difficulty." Emma stared at him for a moment, trying to decipher the man's almost calculated coldness. Something about the way he talked about control seemed sad to her, as if it were a barrier he imposed on himself without question. Still, she agreed to maintain what he called control, but with the silent promise to herself that if something went wrong, she would not hesitate to leave. They agreed on additional details about their daily interaction, discussing how they would act at social events, press presentations, and any situation that required them to be together publicly. Ethan guided Emma through the dinners, galas, and cocktail parties they would need to attend, and after hours of conversation, they were both exhausted, aware of the complexity they had taken on. However, the first big challenge came unexpectedly the following weekend, when Ethan abruptly announced that they would need to visit his mother. Emma couldn't contain her shock. "Although I knew I would eventually meet Ethan's family, I didn't expect it to happen so soon. And I knew from Ethan's tone that he wasn't particularly excited either." "My mother is a traditional woman, Emma," he began, in a careful tone she hadn't heard before. "I don't think she's going to make things easy for you. So, be prepared." His words sounded like a warning. Emma took a deep breath, feeling her nervousness growing, but tried to remain calm. She was used to dealing with direct and intense people, but Ethan himself left her disconcerted. So imagining a more rigid and severe version of his personality seemed almost like a nightmare. On Sunday afternoon, they set sail for Connecticut, where Ethan's mother, Margaret Hayes, lived on a family estate that had been a symbol of the Hayes bloodline for generations. The house was a mansion surrounded by symmetrically trimmed gardens, with a grandeur that caused an instant feeling of intimidation. When the car stopped in front of the gate, Emma found herself holding her breath, already anticipating the impending judgment. Margaret was waiting for them in the entrance hall, a cold, calculating look lighting up her face as she assessed them from head to toe. Her posture was impeccable, her hair tied into a stiff, elegant bun. The navy blue dress without any creases seemed to exude authority, and his eyes, as soon as they fell on Emma, made it clear that she did not go unnoticed. "So this is Emma," said Margaret, her voice filled with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "We finally met." Emma struggled to maintain her composure, trying to ignore the weight of expectations and veiled judgment. Ethan was at her side, his posture rigid and his gaze distant, as if he were used to this environment and his mother's incisive opinions. He tried to break the ice, extending a hand toward Emma and gently intertwining his fingers with hers, a gesture that surprised her. "Yes, Mother. This is Emma, my wife," he stated, in a firm tone, with a slight smile that indicated support, but without showing nervousness. Margaret gave them an appraising look and invited them into the living room, where a tea table was already set up. As the three settled in, Emma noticed that although the room was impeccably decorated, Everything seemed sterile, with objects strategically placed more for display than to be used. He felt like he was in a museum, and any awkward movement could break that aura of perfection. So Margaret began, pouring the tea with precise gestures. "Tell me more about yourself. Where do you come from? What's your story?" Emma took a sip of tea, trying to keep her shaking hands from betraying her nervousness. "I'm from a small town in North Carolina. I studied fine arts and recently moved to New York, looking for opportunities in the field." Margaret paused briefly, watching her with eagle eyes. "Fine arts, how interesting. And tell me, what exactly does your family do? Are they involved in the financial market or industry?" Emma felt even more uncomfortable. The truth was that her family had been experiencing financial difficulties forever, and she saw no point in pretending a different reality. He glanced at Ethan, who seemed to be waiting for his answer with a slight air of curiosity. "My mother was a teacher, and my father was a factory worker. They always valued hard work and encouraged my dreams, even when conditions were difficult." Margaret raised an eyebrow, a look of displeasure crossing her face for a brief moment. "Hard work indeed. I imagine it must have been difficult for you to adapt to a reality like Ethan's, no?" The tone was almost ironic, and Emma knew it was a dig. Before he could respond, Ethan intervened, his voice firm and sharp. "Emma is more adaptable than many might assume, Mom, and I honestly believe that her background and values are exactly what is best about her." Emma looked at Ethan, surprised by the defense. She knew he was just fulfilling the role of protective husband, but his tone rang true, as if he truly valued her humble origins. Margaret seemed slightly upset, but continued the conversation, now addressing her son. "Ethan, my dear, I understand your interest in finding someone, let's say, different, but marriage requires more than temporary compatibility. It needs commitment, shared values, and status." Emma felt the discomfort in the lady's words, but remained firm, determined not to be intimidated. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed even more determined despite his mother. "We share more values than you realize, Mom. And I believe that Emma doesn't need status to be exactly the person I want by my side." Margaret closed her mouth in a thin line, visibly irritated. There was something about that woman that made Emma understand a little more about Ethan's need for control, the rigidity with which he led his life. It seemed obvious that Margaret demanded the same type of behavior from her son, a posture that was always calculated and impeccable. At the end of tea, Margaret said goodbye with a final comment, making it clear that, in her eyes, Emma was not someone worthy of the position of her son's wife. Emma held herself back, taking a deep breath, without responding. Ethan, aware of Emma's discomfort, intertwined his fingers with hers again, a gesture that now felt natural and unexpectedly comforting. They left the mansion in silence, with tension still hanging between them, but a shared relief at the feeling of freedom. During the way back, Ethan broke the silence, his voice serious but with a tone of implicit apology. "I'm sorry about that, Emma. My mother has a peculiar way of seeing the world." Emma shrugged, trying to soften the moment. "I believe she has her reasons. To people like her, someone like me must seem inadequate." Ethan looked at her, his dark eyes taking in every detail of Emma's face. "She may have her reasons, but they are not mine. And as far as I know, our agreement does not involve her approval." Emma smiled slightly, surprised by the statement. For the rest of the journey, he thought about what that visit meant. She knew the marriage was temporary, but Ethan's words and gestures, the way he had defended her, indicated that perhaps he was more committed than he had let on. And although she resisted admitting it to herself, she was grateful for it. Emma's first day at Ethan's office started early, with him picking her up at her apartment. When she got into the car, she noticed that he was already immersed in emails and calls, an expression of intense concentration that seemed to have permanently molded itself to his face. Although they shared the same space, the silence and coldness between them created an abyss. The ride to Hayes Beauty headquarters was almost wordless, with Ethan absorbed in brief instructions and responses to his assistants over the phone. Upon arriving, Emma was faced with the grandeur of the building that housed the company. Hayes Beauty occupied the top of a glass and steel skyscraper, a reflection of Ethan's ambitious and impeccable vision. The hallways were impeccable, and the entrance lobby exuded a reserved modern luxury with neutral-toned walls and touches of marble and crystal. As she walked alongside Ethan, it was impossible to ignore the curious gazes that followed them. Whispers arose here and there, and a few long glances indicated that Emma's presence had made an instant impact. Ethan, unfazed, guided her to the private elevator, giving some quick instructions on what she should expect. "Today, I will introduce you to the board and the senior team. You just need to follow along, and as we agreed, act like my wife." Emma nodded, trying to hide her nervousness. Being introduced as the wife of the CEO of one of the largest cosmetics companies in the country seemed surreal. She knew she didn't fit into that world of luxury and sophistication, but she took a deep breath, remembering the agreement and what was at stake. When the elevator opened on the executive floor, Ethan led her down a wide hallway where paintings from past Hayes beauty campaigns adorned the walls. Emma was briefly mesmerized by the images, taking in the elegance, colors, and visual impact. It was evident that the company valued every detail of its image. And for a moment, Emma felt like another aesthetic element inserted into the environment to convey a message of stability and commitment. As they passed through reception, Ethan greeted some assistants and went straight to the meeting room. His personal secretary, an elegant and discreet woman named Olivia, gave Emma an appraising look before smiling politely and opening the door, where the board of directors was waiting. When they entered, the murmur in the room stopped. All eyes turned to her, and Emma felt her face heat up. The board members, all in formal attire, maintained neutral expressions, but Emma noticed that many were intently watching her every move, as if wanting to see if this unlikely wife truly belonged in the young CEO's world. Ethan, as always, was prepared. He began a brief introduction, describing Emma as his wife, a talented artist who offered new creative perspectives. With his every word, Emma felt the eyes of those present on her, evaluating every detail. When he finally concluded, with a light, courteous smile that seemed rehearsed, the directors nodded, some of them expressing formal, well-mannered greetings. At the end of the presentation, Ethan took her to see his own office. It was a spacious and refined environment, with glass windows that went from floor to ceiling, offering a stunning view of the city. The design was monochromatic, conveying the same organized coolness that Ethan seemed to exude. Books perfectly aligned on the shelves, a glass table with minimal objects, and just a touch of color in the strategic potted plants. "Welcome to the center of it all," he commented, a hint of pride in his voice. Emma, however, felt uncomfortable in that impeccable space, where every detail seemed a reminder that she was an intruder in this world. "So how are you feeling?" he asked, watching her. Emma hesitated, but decided to be honest. "I feel like I'm an ornament, like these plants," he replied, casting a meaningful glance at a vase next to the table. "You brought me here to play a role, and that's exactly how I feel." Ethan didn't show any reaction, but he seemed to be considering her words carefully. "Part of the deal involves keeping up appearances, Emma, and if I remember correctly, you were the one who accepted this role." His response angered her, but Emma forced herself to remain calm. "Yes, I accepted. I just didn't imagine that I would feel so invisible at the same time that everyone seems to be watching me." Before he could respond, a knock on the door interrupted the conversation. Olivia came in and reported that the employees were eager to meet the CEO's wife. With one last look at Ethan, Emma prepared to face a new stage of that day. The path to the main room felt like a parade. Emma noticed that many employees stopped to look at her, some giving her polite smiles, while others watched with curiosity or even suspicion. Ethan's reputation as a reserved, business-minded man was known to everyone, and the idea that he was married seemed as surprising to the employees as it did to herself. When they finally reached the main room, Ethan formally introduced her to the senior team members. Upon hearing the word wife, a suppressed sigh ran through the group. Emma did her best to smile and greet everyone, trying to appear natural, but she felt as if she were on a stage, with every glance analyzing her presence, her gestures, her appearance. The difference between her and those executives was stark. She didn't belong in that world, and everyone seemed to realize that. During the introductions, Ethan remained by her side, with the posture of a protective, almost possessive husband. At one point, while talking to one of the directors, he subtly pulled her closer, a gesture she knew was part of theater, but which made her uncomfortably aware of his proximity. Emma smiled at the people around her, but her gaze met Ethan's, and something in his gaze seemed to convey a kind of pride. He had built an empire, and she could see, even behind the stolid CEO mask, that there was a part of him that really valued that image of stability and mutual support, even if it was staged. As they circulated among the employees, Emma noticed that there was a specific group of people who seemed even more curious and perhaps a little hostile. They were, for the most part, executives with impeccable appearance, who gave appraising looks and polite smiles, but who, from time to time, exchanged whispers that Emma couldn't catch. One of them, a tall woman with perfect posture named Vivian, seemed particularly intrigued by Emma. After the initial introduction, Vivian approached with a sharp smile and an almost too sweet tone of voice. "So you're the new Mrs. Hayes," she said, with a look that ran Emma up and down. "It must be difficult to adapt to this new reality, right?" Emma felt the implied provocation, but kept her expression calm. "Actually, it's been an interesting challenge. Ethan and I have a lot in common," she replied, with a smile that she hoped conveyed the confidence she didn't actually feel. Vivian raised an eyebrow, surprised by Emma's response. "I'm glad to hear that. It's just, Ethan has always been very demanding of those around him, so I imagine you must have something special to win him over." Before Emma could respond, Ethan appeared beside them, placing his hand gently on Emma's back and giving Vivian a straight look. "Emma is more than special, Vivian. She understands what's essential to me, and I think that's enough." Vivian, a little disconcerted, muttered a quick reply and walked away. Emma realized that Ethan had deliberately defended his role, as he had with his mother, and it made her feel an unexpected wave of gratitude. He didn't need to position himself like that, but he still did it. Throughout the day, as they faced more introductions and small conversations, Ethan's presence by her side seemed to give her strength, as if he were protecting her from criticism and suspicion. At the end of the day, when they finally left the office, Emma felt exhausted, as if she had just faced a marathon of critical looks and veiled expectations. Ethan seemed to notice her tiredness and offered to take her to dinner. At the restaurant, the conversation flowed more lightly. Ethan, away from the office, seemed a little more relaxed, and Emma, even though tired, felt surprisingly comfortable. Over the course of the meal, they talked about less formal topics, and Emma caught him laughing at her joke for the first time, a sound that seemed as natural as it was unexpected. As they smiled and exchanged glances, Emma caught a glimpse of what might lie beyond the facade of control he had built. She realized that, perhaps behind that serious and impenetrable posture, there was someone who also wanted something more than just perfect appearance. On the way back to the apartment, Ethan paused briefly before opening the door for her. "It was a good first day," he said, almost knowingly. "I think we're on the right track." Emma nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief. Yes, that was a good start. They entered the apartment and said goodbye to go to their respective rooms. But Emma couldn't stop thinking about the exchange of looks. His words, the subtle gestures he made throughout the day to protect her. It was clear that the false appearance was still part of the deal. But somehow this interaction seemed to be starting to take root in a way neither of them had anticipated. The night was silent, and the apartment seemed immersed in an almost unrecognizable calm after the frantic day at the office. Emma, still in her room, tried to distract herself with some reading, but the day's events made her restless. The way Ethan had defended her, both from her mother and her team, had surprised her. It wasn't the first time he had taken on a protective role by her side, but something that day seemed different, as if beyond the role of fake husband, he was actually by her side in a sincere way. As he was thinking about this, he heard footsteps in the hallway. She got up, driven by an impulse to thank him for his behavior at work, and opened the door. He found Ethan standing in the living room, his hands in his pants pockets and his gaze in the distance, fixed on the city lights outside the window. He looked thoughtful, with a lighter expression than usual. As he saw her approach, he made a brief gesture with his head, inviting her to join him. I couldn't sleep, she said, smiling hesitantly. The day was pretty intense. Ethan nodded with a discreet smile. Yeah, I have my nights like that too. I think work doesn't leave my head as easily as I'd like. Emma sat on the sofa next to him, and for a few minutes they both remained silent, watching the city lights. It seemed like the stillness of the apartment became part of that wordless conversation. Ethan finally broke the silence, turning to her with a contemplative look. You know, Emma, I've always wondered how people can disconnect from everything after a busy day. It's different with me. Work is more than just an obligation to me. Emma watched him carefully, intrigued. It was rare to see him open up, even briefly, and she didn't want to miss the opportunity to get to know him better. It always seemed like you lived for work, he commented, choosing his words carefully. But isn't this tiring? Hash, 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 he let out a short, humorless laugh. Tiring? Maybe, but it's the only thing I know. I grew up with the idea that work was what defined who I was. Emma continued to watch him in silence, not wanting to pressure him, but encouraging him to continue. After a few moments of hesitation, he continued, his gaze fixed on a distant point. When I was a child, my life revolved around expectations. My father was a strict man, and my mother always expected me to become someone worthy of the family. There was never room for error. Every grade at school, every choice I made, everything was calculated to the millimeter. There was no room for what I wanted, only what they wanted from me. The words came out with a mix of bitterness and resignation, as if he were revealing long-kept secrets. Emma felt a wave of empathy wash over her. For the first time, I glimpsed the invisible weight Ethan carried. I imagine it must have been difficult growing up like that, she said, in a gentle tone. That explains why you're so disciplined. Hasher, hash, hash, Ethan let out a sigh, his eyes now focused on her. Discipline is the only thing I know. When my father died, the responsibility of the company fell on me. There was no time for mourning, nor for regrets. I needed to prove that I was capable, not only to myself, but to everyone around me. My mother expected me to take charge as efficiently as my father, so I did what I thought was necessary, as if my life depended on it. Emma shook her head, taking in every word. It was surprising to hear Ethan open up like that, revealing the layers he hid beneath the mask of an unflappable CEO. She moved a little closer, leaning towards him as if to show that she was there to listen to him without judgment. But it must have been a heavy burden to carry alone, she said, almost in a whisper. Haven't you ever thought about sharing this burden with someone? He smiled, a sad smile that expressed the frustration of a life of solitude. I got used to not trusting people, Emma. Every person who approached me wanted something in return. I grew up with the idea that feelings were a luxury I couldn't afford. Emma looked down, reflecting on his words. It seemed so clear that he had built a barrier, an armor to protect himself from any vulnerability, and that explained so much of his posture. He was a man who used control as a shield, but behind that impenetrable facade was a silent pain and a deep loneliness. You know, Ethan, she began carefully, not everyone wants something from you. Sometimes people just want to get to know you, understand what's going on inside. She gestured, pointing at his chest, as if she could touch the invisible layer of sadness that surrounded him. Ethan looked at her, a little surprised by her sincerity. He had always imagined that no one would ever care about the wounds he hid. But here was Emma, someone he barely knew, offering him understanding without asking for anything in return. It's hard to believe that when you grow up being told you can only trust yourself, he replied, his voice barely audible. It's like the only thing I know how to do is build walls. Emma took a deep breath, feeling more and more touched by his words. Maybe you've built so many walls that you've isolated yourself from the world. Ethan, loneliness may be a choice, but it's also a prison. He stared at her, as if pondering every word. There was something about her sincerity that seemed to break down his defenses, a connection he hadn't expected to feel. It was as if Emma saw beyond the layers he carefully maintained. What about you, Emma? What was it like growing up without that pressure? He asked, perhaps seeking relief from his own memories. She laughed, a soft sound that echoed in the room. I think my childhood was the opposite of yours. I grew up in a simple home, with parents who always encouraged me to follow my dreams. Even when we barely had money to pay the bills, every achievement, no matter how small, was celebrated. There were no rigid expectations, but there was love. Ethan watched her, absorbing every word. That seemed so far from his reality that it was almost like listening to a fictional story. It must have been nice to have that freedom. Emma nodded, looking distant. It was, but at the same time, I always felt a responsibility to do well, in some way, to honor their sacrifice. I never had an obligation to be perfect, but I had the desire to make it worth it. For an instant, they looked at each other, and a mutual understanding hung in the air. Ethan realized that, somehow, Emma also knew pressure, but in a different, less relentless way. He saw in her a strength that came from the genuine desire to return love, and that touched him in an unexpected way. "Emma," he said, almost in a whisper, "you can't imagine how rare it is for me to have a conversation like this." She smiled, leaning slightly towards him. "Maybe you should allow yourself more moments like this. It doesn't always have to be so isolated." For a moment, he considered the possibility. Maybe there was a world where he could be vulnerable, share his anguish, and finally, let someone see beyond the barriers. But at the same time, he felt a deep fear. Vulnerability was something he avoided, something that seemed to threaten the foundation of everything he had built. Ethan hesitated, looking away. "Emma, you're different from anything I know. You have a lightness that I don't know how to deal with." Emma felt her heart quicken at his words. She knew this was Ethan's way of saying she meant something special, and it moved her. It was clear he was resisting the urge to open up completely, but she could see his effort, his attempt to let his guard down, even if just for a moment. "Ethan, I'm just here to help, not to ask you for anything in return. What you feel is safe with me, always." He looked at her, and for a moment, their eyes met in a way that transcended words. It was as if, in that brief moment, they both understood something profound and ineffable, something that didn't need to be said, but that was there, between them, forming a silent bond. "Thank you, Emma," he murmured, a tone of sincerity filling each syllable. "I don't think anyone has made me feel this way before." They remained silent for a few more minutes, each absorbing the intensity of that moment. In that luxurious and isolated apartment, Emma and Ethan shared a night of confidence that would deeply mark the bond between them. And when they finally said goodbye and each went to their room, they both knew that something had changed. Ethan felt lighter, almost as if the weight he had carried for so long had lifted a little. And Emma, as she lay down, felt strangely connected to him, as if she understood more than ever the hidden loneliness of that man who appeared to have everything, but who deep down carried wounds that no one had ever seen. That night, they both slept with the feeling that somehow they had found a safe space for their own weaknesses in each other. It was as if, even if they didn't want to admit it, they were getting closer in a way that went far beyond the formal agreement and appearances that surrounded them. The morning seemed normal until Ethan's cell phone ring broke the silence in the apartment. He was in the kitchen, getting ready for another day of work, when he answered the call with an impersonal tone. But within seconds, Ethan's expression transformed. His shoulders tensed, and his usually controlled face took on a tense look. He hung up without saying a word and remained silent, staring at the device with a strange intensity. Emma, who had just entered the kitchen, noticed the change. "Ethan, did something happen?" He took a few seconds to respond, still absorbing the words of the call. "My mom, she's in the hospital. It looks like it was something serious." Emma didn't need any further explanation. She set aside the coffee she was holding and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Ethan didn't push her away, but she could feel the tension coursing through his body like an electric current. He was vulnerable, something she had never seen before. "I'll go with you," Emma said without hesitation. Ethan hesitated, surprised by the proposal, but something in his eyes seemed relieved by her presence. They left hurriedly, the silence between them thick with worry. On the way, Emma could see Ethan's closed expression, his gaze fixed and expressionless, as if he was trying to shield himself against the fear and pain that clearly shook him. When they arrived at the hospital, they were directed to the intensive care area. Emma realized that as familiar as Ethan was with business crisis control, Nothing had prepared him to deal with an emergency so close at hand. The usual stiffness of his face now reflected an uneasiness he couldn't hide, and Emma had the feeling he was on the edge of an emotional abyss. The nurse who received them explained that Margaret, Ethan's mother, had had a serious heart complication and that her condition was critical but stable. Ethan listened to the nurse's words with a tense nod of his head, thanking him in a low voice. Emma accompanied him to a waiting room, where he finally allowed himself to sit down and bow his head, as if the weight of everything was about to crush him. "She's all I have left of my family, Emma," he said, his voice quieter than ever. "Despite all the conflicts, I never imagined something like this could happen to her." Emma came over, sitting next to him, and placed her hand over his. "I didn't know what to say, because I felt like words weren't enough at that moment." That vulnerable Ethan was a side of him she never expected to see. Emma understood the complexity of his relationship with his mother. Although strict and demanding, she was the only familiar figure he still had. And now, with his health at risk, Ethan's sense of helplessness was palpable. The minutes dragged by slowly. Ethan remained silent, but Emma could feel the tension radiating from him. After a while, he broke the silence, his gaze fixed on the ground. "I was never the son she expected. I always felt like I was just an extension of what she wanted for her family." Emma squeezed his hand, feeling the underlying pain in his words. "Ethan, you did your best. People can't always see that, but your worth doesn't depend on her approval." He looked at her, an expression of tiredness mixed with surprise. Ethan had always been concerned with the appearance of strength and authority, but in this moment he was unarmed, allowing Emma to see the man behind the impeccable CEO facade. "Sometimes I wonder," he murmured, "if all my effort was worth it. If being who I am now is worth what I sacrificed." Emma kept her gaze steady on him, willing herself to find the right words. "I knew he was someone who had molded himself to rigid expectations, who had sought approval from everyone but himself. But the moment didn't seem to demand ready answers, just the comfort of his presence." "Maybe not everything needs to have a measurable value, Ethan," she said in a soft tone. "You are more than the CEO of Hayes Beauty. People around you don't always see it, but I can see it." He smiled slightly, a tired but genuine smile. "You always surprise me, Emma. I never imagined someone would actually be able to see me. It's strange." Emma smiled back, not wanting to show how much that confession meant to her. As much as they had started that relationship as an act, the connection between them was growing in unexpected ways, creating an intimacy that neither of them had planned. The doctor arrived a short time later, reporting that Ethan's mother was stable and that he could see her for a few minutes. Ethan's voice shook as he thanked the doctor, and Emma saw once again the fragility he was trying to hide. She lightly touched his arm before he left, a silent promise that she would be there waiting. While he was in his mother's room, Emma walked down the hall, trying to organize her own thoughts. In the last few days, he had begun to notice that the bond between them was growing stronger. It wasn't just admiration for Ethan's intelligence or strength. It was the fact that he allowed himself to be human beside her, that she could see him without the masks he wore with the world. It was as if, even without meaning to, they were creating a real bond. When he returned, his gaze was distant, as if he was still processing the vision of his weakened mother. Emma remained by his side as they left the hospital, both of them enveloped in a knowing silence. She knew he was still digesting the emotions of the day, and she respected that space, offering only her presence without demanding anything in return. On the way back to the apartment, Ethan broke the silence, his voice lower and more introspective than usual. "She looked at me today, and for the first time, she seemed to see something beyond her expectations." Emma stared at him, feeling the weight of his words. He continued, as if he needed to get something off his chest that he had been holding back for a long time. "I always thought that if I was enough, she would eventually accept me. But now I realize that maybe I spent too much time trying to fill something that was never empty." Emma nodded, her heart sinking at the sincerity of his confession. She knew how much he craved approval, how much his every choice had been shaped by his desire to be seen as worthy. But at the same time, She saw that he was beginning to understand that acceptance was not dependent on others. It was something he needed to offer himself. "Maybe it's time for you to allow yourself to be who you really are, Ethan," she said, in a soft tone. "Life doesn't always have to be about expectations." Ethan looked deeply at her, and for a moment, Emma felt as if she could see her own reflection in his eyes. He seemed to be absorbing her every word, as if her presence was an anchor amidst the turbulent sea of emotions. When they arrived at the apartment, Ethan remained beside her in the hallway, making no move to move away. He seemed hesitant, as if he wanted to say something that was stored inside him, but couldn't find the right words. "Emma," he began, a slight tremor in his voice, "thank you for being there for me today. I don't know if I could have gotten through this alone." Emma felt her heart quicken, his words echoing with a sincerity she hadn't expected to hear. "You don't have to face everything alone, Ethan. I'm here, and I will be, as long as you need me." He nodded, his gaze filled with something Emma couldn't quite define. It was as if he was assessing the depth of what he felt, a connection that went beyond what they had anticipated. The closeness between them was inevitable, and she knew she was on a path of no return. "Good night, Emma," he said, almost in a whisper, before walking away to his own room. She watched him disappear down the hallway, her heart still pounding with the intensity of the moment. He knew that that night marked a turning point between them, an invisible line that brought them irreversibly closer. And even though she was aware of the risks, Emma felt that there was something undeniably true in the connection between them. Emma knew that life with Ethan would not be simple, but she was far from imagining the complexity of the shadows that surrounded not only his life, but also Hayes' beauty. A few weeks had passed since the incident at the hospital with his mother, and although their relationship had taken on an unexpected closeness, Ethan continued to be a man of few words when it came to the company. Emma realized that there was a wall around his professional life, as if any attempt to invade that space meant a personal threat. That morning started like any other, until Emma overheard a conversation between the company's senior executives during an office coffee break. Ethan was in an important meeting, and Emma took the time to explore the building and absorb a little more of the world she was adapting to. As she walked through the halls, she noticed two directors having a restrained but tense conversation in the small lounge next to the hallway where she was passing. "If we continue at this pace, shareholders will completely lose confidence. Expansion into the European market should have been the turning point, but as it stands, the scenario's not good. Hayes has been pushing, but without the financial results to back it up, we're headed straight for disaster," one of the men was saying, his voice thick with concern. The other director nodded with a nervous sigh. "We need an urgent capital inflow. With the current situation, if investors don't feel stability, no one will want to take risks, especially with the new policy on luxury products." Emma felt her heart speed up. The words sounded serious and revealed a reality that she had not imagined. If Hayes Beauty was facing financial problems, that would explain many of Ethan's recent decisions, including his own marriage. Could it be possible that that shell deal was directly related to trying to keep the company afloat? As I pondered this, anxiety began to turn into outrage. If marriage was truly a financial strategy, Ethan had lied to her by withholding that truth. Agreement or not, she had involved herself body and soul, and seeing that he was hiding something so serious lit a spark of frustration. Emma waited until Ethan returned to the office. He entered the room with a tired expression, clearly exhausted after hours of arguments and negotiations. But before he could even notice her condition, Emma closed the door behind him, her gaze firm and accusing. "Ethan," she began, her voice tense but controlled, "we need to talk." He looked up, surprised by her tone. "What happened?" Emma took a deep breath, trying to maintain her self-control. "I overheard a conversation about the situation at Hayes Beauty, about how you guys are pushing for expansion without the necessary financial backing. It's true, isn't it? The company is in serious trouble." For a moment, Ethan remained silent, his eyes fixed on her with an expression that wavered between coldness and irritation. His posture stiffened, and Emma saw a shadow of suspicion appear on his face. "And what exactly do you mean by that?" he asked, his tone more distant and impersonal than ever. "I want to say that now I understand why you got married. You didn't do it just for the image of stability." "Ethan," You did it because you desperately need investors' trust. And without a wife to convey that image, the company could lose everything. Emma's voice was a mix of hurt and indignation, and she didn't try to hide the pain underlying her words. Ethan stared at her for a few seconds without moving. His expression was stony, but his eyes revealed a slight discomfort that he was trying to hide. He passed his hand over his forehead, looking away as if searching for the right words, or perhaps because he didn't want to face the intensity in her eyes. "Emma, you knew from the beginning that this marriage was a strategy," he replied, his voice cool and controlled. "If this is something that surprises you, then perhaps you misinterpreted the agreement." Emma felt her face heat up, the weight of his words like a cutting blade. "Yes, I knew it was an agreement, but I thought it was something simple. A demand to keep up appearances. I never imagined that I was getting involved in a crisis that you hid from me." Ethan let out an exasperated sigh, his fine control over his emotions beginning to crack. "I brought you here to play a role. That's all, Emma. It's not about confidence or lack thereof. It's about protecting my family's legacy. Something that is more important than any vulnerability I could share." His cold response hit her hard. Emma felt betrayed, not by the nature of the contract itself, but by the way he had excluded her from the truth, as if she were a disposable piece. She believed that, in the last few days, something genuine had emerged between them, a connection that went beyond obligations. However, in the face of Ethan's coldness, the feeling of closeness seemed to crumble. "So that's it?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. "For you, am I just a piece in this game?" He remained silent for a moment, as if trying to control himself. "Emma, you accepted the deal knowing the conditions. There's no room for emotions here." That statement infuriated her even more. Emma took a step forward, her gaze challenging. "You talk as if it's possible to control how we feel, Ethan. As if the only thing that matters is the role I play for your company. But I thought we were really getting to know each other, that I meant something more." Ethan stared at her, his expression hardening. "I never promised feelings, Emma. That wasn't part of the deal." The words fell over her like an icy wave, and Emma felt the bitterness rise in her throat. Maybe she had been naive to believe he could care. Maybe she was deluded into thinking that those shared moments meant something to him. Seeing him there, distant and insensitive, as if the weight of what they shared was nothing more than a commercial transaction, Emma realized how much he had shielded himself from any feelings. "I understand now," she said, her voice lower, holding back the pain that wanted to spill over. "For you, it's all about control. Control your emotions, control the people around you. But you know what, Ethan? Controlling others will not fill the emptiness you feel." He remained impassive, but Emma could notice a slight twitch in his jaw, as if those words had hit a vulnerable spot. However, he maintained his rigid posture, regaining his usual coolness. "You're wrong, Emma. This is about protecting what's mine," he replied, his tone challenging. "And I don't care what you think about it." Emma looked at him, her heart sinking, and realized that any attempt to make him see beyond that obsessive control would be in vain. Ethan had built a fortress around himself, and he was willing to maintain the defenses no matter the cost. She felt that perhaps he was incapable of allowing any vulnerability, any genuine closeness, and that saddened her. With one last look at him, Emma took a deep breath, trying to calm her own emotions. "I hope it was worth it, Ethan. And I hope that one day you realize that not everything in life can be bought or controlled." She walked away from him, leaving him alone in the room, lost among his own choices. The atmosphere in Ethan's apartment had remained tense since the discussion about the Hayes Beauty situation. Emma tried to maintain the emotional distance that he had emphasized so much from the beginning, but the hurt was still in the air. Ethan, on the other hand, remained closed off, as if the silence were a refuge where he could rebuild the walls that Emma had begun to tear down. However, something inside him was unsettling, a nagging feeling that he couldn't ignore. The image of Emma's disappointed look still tormented him, and he couldn't deny that he had allowed himself to relax and be himself around her, something that didn't happen often. However, the discomfort began to give way to something stronger, a desire to correct the situation. He felt that he needed, in some way, to show Emma a side of his life that she didn't yet know. outside the shadows of the company and formalities. It was then that he made an impulsive decision, something he would never normally do. In the late afternoon, after an exhausting meeting, Ethan sent Emma a short message. "Pack your bags. We leave in an hour." Emma, surprised and skeptical, still shaken from their last conversation, hesitated before answering. But there was something in his message that made her consider the proposal, as if it were an attempt to repair the tension. After all, even with the pain still fresh, a part of her wanted to understand Ethan in a deeper way. Without thinking much, she threw some clothes into a small bag and an hour later found herself in the garage, where Ethan was already waiting for her. During the car ride, Ethan did not explain his destination. He drove concentratedly, with his eyes fixed on the road. But every now and then he stole glances at Emma, as if trying to gauge her state of mind. The radio played softly, filling the silence between them with tranquil melodies, until the landscape began to gradually change. Tall buildings gave way to smaller houses, and the smell of the sea began to invade the air, fresh and revitalizing. "Are we heading to the coast?" Emma asked, surprised, breaking the silence. Ethan nodded with a brief, discreet smile. "I thought some fresh air would do us some good." Emma suppressed a smile, surprised by the gesture. It was unusual for him to make an impulsive decision, especially something outside of his controlled routine. When the car finally parked in a more secluded area of the beach, Emma got out, taking a deep breath of the salty air and feeling the wind ruffle her hair. The beach was practically deserted, just a few people walking in the distance, and the sky, already dyed in shades of orange and pink, indicated the end of the day. Ethan walked beside her, silently, and for a moment, Emma almost forgot about the tension surrounding them. It was strange to see him there, without the weight of his impeccable suit or the walls of his apartment. He seemed more human, closer, as if the wind and the relaxed atmosphere invited him to relax in a way she had never witnessed. "Thank you for agreeing to come," he said, his voice low, almost as if he was confessing something. Emma shrugged, looking at the horizon. "I didn't know you liked beaches. That seems a little out of your style." Ethan smiled, a sincere smile she rarely saw. "Believe it or not, I like this kind of place. It's the only place where I can disconnect from everything, where control isn't so necessary." Emma watched him in silence, noticing how the environment seemed to soften the lines of his face, making him almost unrecognizable. They walked side by side on the sand, the waves lapping gently at their feet. The closeness between them began to dissolve the last barriers, creating an atmosphere of mute understanding. After a few minutes, Ethan stopped and turned to Emma, his gaze fixed and intense, as if searching for the right words. "I'm sorry, Emma," he said, his voice filled with rare sincerity. "I shouldn't have hidden the truth about the company from you. It was selfish of me." Emma looked at him, surprised by the confession. She still felt hurt, but the apology disarmed some of her resistance. "You know, you could have been honest from the beginning. Ethan, we're both in this situation by agreement, but that doesn't mean we can't be honest." He nodded, looking out to sea. "It's hard for me to let someone in like that. The truth is, when my life became this responsibility of supporting the company, I started to see everything as numbers, transactions. It was my way of surviving." Emma watched him closely, feeling the weight of his words. It was as if, in this place, he was finally allowing himself to be who he was, without the shield of control or the need to appear strong. She realized that, even without wanting to, he carried a disguised fragility, a part of himself that he avoided showing to the world. "So why did you bring me here?" she asked, her voice soft but full of meaning. Ethan took a deep breath, hesitating before answering. "Because somehow you make me want to be someone different, someone who doesn't have to hide behind the walls they've built. And lately, I think I feel more comfortable around you than anyone else." Emma felt her heart quicken at his sincerity. The environment, the wind, the cold sand beneath their feet, everything seemed to conspire to create a moment where the two were finally connected. Without the pressures of work, a contract, or the fears that surrounded them, they walked a little longer in silence, until Ethan guided her to a rock formation where they could sit and watch the sun set over the horizon. There, the silence between them was comforting. Ethan looked contemplative, as if he was struggling with something inside him. Finally, he turned to Emma, his eyes reflecting the golden evening light. "I never imagined I would meet someone like you, Emma," he began, his voice low but full of emotion. "Someone who doesn't demand anything from me, who is simply here, listening to me." Emma smiled, feeling warmth invade her chest. She felt his sincerity, and something inside her responded to it, just as genuinely. "Maybe it's because I'm not here for what you can offer, Ethan. I just want to get to know you." Ethan remained silent, absorbing her words. It was as if that sentence confronted him, challenging him to be someone other than the calculating CEO. For a moment, he had the feeling that, next to Emma, he could allow himself to let his guard down, live a simple moment without the weights he always carried. They sat until the sun completely disappeared, enveloped in the soft darkness that precedes night. As the temperature began to drop, Emma hugged her shoulders, trying to keep warm. Ethan noticed, and without thinking much, took off his coat and placed it around her shoulders, a simple gesture, but full of care. "Thank you," she murmured, surprised by the unexpected kindness. "I don't want you to get cold," he replied, in a tone that almost sounded like a confession. Emma realized that this moment was perhaps the closest they had ever been. Nothing else was needed, just that silent act of caring, of demonstrating that, despite everything, he wanted to protect her in some way. Time seemed suspended as they returned to the car. Ethan drove in silence, and Emma watched the lights passing by the window, lost in her thoughts. He felt that this unexpected outing was more than an apologetic gesture. It had been a chance to see Ethan as he really was, without the barriers of pride and control. When they arrived at the apartment, Ethan opened the door for her, a discreet gesture, but one that, for Emma, conveyed a kindness that he rarely demonstrated. Upon entering, she felt a knot of emotions forming in her chest, a mixture of gratitude and understanding for the man who was there, finally revealing itself in small attitudes. Before they said goodbye for the night, Ethan stopped and looked at her, as if he was hesitant to walk away. Emma realized in that moment how vulnerable he seemed, as if he was finally allowing himself the possibility of opening up, of letting her see more than his ruthless boss and his obedient son. She felt the impulse to reach out her hand, to touch his and comfort him, but she held back the gesture, allowing the moment to remain at its own pace. "Good evening, Emma," he said, his tone softer than ever, as if those words carried a message he didn't dare voice. "Good night, Ethan," she replied, her heart beating fast. As she walked to her own room, Emma couldn't help but smile. That night had been a watershed. It had been a step towards something that they both, even if unconsciously, wanted. The morning after the trip to the coast, a new energy seemed to permeate the environment. Emma felt like something important had changed between her and Ethan, as if their time together at the beach had dissolved some of the barriers that still separated them. Upon returning to the Hayes Beauty office, however, they re-entered a world where formalities and appearances demanded a new posture, a stark contrast to the silent intimacy they had experienced the night before. Ethan, observing Emma's artistic abilities and keen eye for aesthetic detail, suggested that she collaborate on the company's cosmetics line. The proposal came somewhat naturally, but it took Emma by surprise. She wondered if that offer was a reflection of the closeness they had built, or if he truly believed in her potential to contribute something meaningful. "I thought that with your design experience, perhaps you could help with the creation of a new line," he said, his expression neutral, but his gaze attentive. Emma studied Ethan's expression, trying to decipher the intentions behind the offer. Still, the idea of working creatively excited her. Art had always been her passion, and seeing her talent being recognized, even more so by someone as demanding as him, touched her. She accepted the proposal with discreet but genuine enthusiasm. "I accept," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's a great opportunity, and I'm going to do my best." Ethan nodded, and Emma saw a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes, although his expression remained controlled. He took her to the design and marketing team, presenting her in a professional manner, and briefly described the project, highlighting the concept of a line that combined elegance with simplicity and innovation, something that would attract sophisticated consumers, but without losing the freshness of a modern brand. Emma listened attentively, already feeling the ideas forming in her mind. At the end of the meeting, Ethan made a point of highlighting his confidence in Emma's talent, but the reaction from some team members was mixed. Olivia, his personal secretary, and other employees seemed suspicious, perhaps even uncomfortable. And Emma noticed a few glances exchanged between them. Even though her relationship with Ethan was a secret, her presence as the CEO's wife on the team caused discomfort among some, as if they saw her presence there as an intrusion or worse, Ethan's whim. Despite her fear of being frowned upon, Emma decided to stay focused on her work. She knew it would be difficult to convince everyone of her abilities, but she was determined to show everyone, including herself, that she deserved that chance. In the following days, he immersed himself in the project, analyzing design concepts, trend references, and even the company's previous campaigns. Ethan had mentioned that the new line should bring something innovative and that they needed to revitalize Haze Beauty's image. And Emma was ready to deliver more than expected. The idea he developed was centered around a concept of products that enhance natural beauty, inspiring self-esteem and authenticity. She wanted to create packaging that was both elegant and sustainable, with an artistic touch that captivated the eye and made the product an object of desire. Instead of adopting the minimalist aesthetic that Ethan preferred, Emma decided to explore soft colors and organic textures that convey lightness and approachability, as well as harmony with the environment. While working on the proposals, he encountered some difficulties. The design group, led by Vivian, the same executive who had given him an appraising look on the first day, seemed hesitant to accept his ideas. Vivian was a strongly opinionated woman and did not seem pleased with Emma's suggestions, often interrupting to question her design choices or suggesting something that deviated from Emma's proposal. With each attempt at dialogue with the team, Emma felt that she faced veiled resistance, but she persevered, determined to overcome the obstacles. Ethan, attentive to everything, watched the work unfold with discretion. At times, Emma felt that he was evaluating the attitudes of Vivian and the rest of the team, but he rarely intervened directly, leaving her to face the difficulties. He seemed to want to test Emma's ability to deal with challenges, and Emma understood that in order to gain his and the team's trust, she needed to prove herself. After days of research and prototypes, Emma completed the design proposals and asked for a meeting to present the project. The conference room was full when she arrived, and as she projected the material onto the screen, she felt the weight of the eyes fixed on her. Vivian stared at her with an impassive expression, and the other directors and team members seemed curious and cautious. "Thank you for giving me this opportunity," she began, trying to hide her nervousness. "My proposal for the new Haze Beauty line focuses on valuing natural beauty. My idea is that each product conveys lightness and authenticity, while at the same time carrying a touch of art, making it special and at the same time accessible. I believe this approach can attract a younger audience concerned about sustainability and innovation." She continued presenting sketches of the packaging, with elements inspired by nature and soft colors that evoked a sense of tranquility and freshness. Every detail had been thought of to provide a complete experience to the consumer, something that was more than a simple cosmetic product, but a reflection of their own individuality and well-being. As Emma spoke, the critical looks from some of the team members gradually turned into expressions of genuine interest. Ethan, sitting at the head of the table, watched her with silent intensity, and Emma could tell that he followed every word with attention and a touch of pride, as if this work was more than just a project for him. When it finished, the room was silent for a few seconds, until one of the directors broke the silence, praising the innovative concept and Emma's sensitivity to capturing the essence of the brand in a unique way. Other team members agreed, and even Vivian, who until then had maintained a rigid stance, couldn't help but recognize Emma's talent, albeit with a slightly reluctant expression. "I must admit, it was an impressive performance, Emma," Vivian said, in a less enthusiastic tone than the others, but still sincere. "I believe the concept really brings something new and different." Emma smiled, surprised and relieved to realize that she had finally won the team's acceptance. The feeling of having her work recognized filled her with a confidence she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt that, More than proving herself to others, she was proving herself to herself, confirming that she deserved to be there. At the end of the meeting, Ethan called her into his office. She entered, her heart still racing from the adrenaline of the performance, but he was waiting for her with a calm and proud expression. He gestured for her to sit, and before Emma could say anything, Ethan broke the silence. "You did an excellent job, Emma," he said, his tone conveying genuine respect. The way he presented his ideas and the way he dealt with the team was impressive. Emma smiled, a little surprised by the sincere compliment. "Thanks, Ethan. It was challenging, but I guess that's part of the process, isn't it?" He nodded, his gaze still fixed on her, as if he wanted to memorize that moment. "I knew you had talent, but to see it applied to a real project is something special, and you earned their respect, even in the face of difficulties." Emma felt the warmth of his words, and more than ever, she felt grateful to be there, to have the opportunity to show her worth in something she was passionate about. It was as if, at that moment, they were both connected by a mutual realization, something that went beyond the agreement and the superficial relationship with which they had started. "Well, I'm glad it worked out," she replied, trying to hide the blush creeping up her face. "I just wanted to show that I can do more than the role I'm supposed to play." Ethan looked at her with a subtle smile, a rare smile that lit up his face in a way Emma had rarely seen. "I never doubted that, Emma, and I hope you know that, no matter what, you will always have a space to show who you really are." Those words stayed with Emma long after that day. She had left that meeting not only with the respect of the team, but with the certainty that, little by little, she was beginning to leave a mark on Ethan's life and on the company that meant so much to him. He felt like he was finally fitting into a place where his talent was valued. And alongside Ethan, he realized that the line between what was true and what had initially been just an agreement was becoming increasingly blurred. The day started with a strange atmosphere, as if something was in the air. On the way to the office, Emma noticed that some people in the lobby were whispering and stealing glances in her direction. She ignored the discomfort and went up to the executive floor, already used to curious looks, but the tension was more noticeable than usual. In the hallway, a group of employees whispered, interrupting the conversation as she passed by. Without understanding why, he continued to Ethan's office, where he would meet the design team for a new review of the project. When he entered, he noticed that Ethan was on the phone, his expression more tense than normal. He noticed her presence and quickly ended the call, but not without showing discomfort that she had never seen before. "Emma," he said, his voice deeper than usual, "I think you should sit down." She felt her heart racing, a mixture of anxiety and nervousness taking over her. "What happened? Why is everyone looking at me weird?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, but then picked up a celebrity magazine that was on the table and handed it to her. The cover featured a photo of her and Ethan leaving the office together, taken in an off-guard moment. Next to the photo, the title in bold letters screamed, "The Billionaire's Secret Wedding." Who is the mystery woman next to Ethan Hayes? Emma felt her stomach drop. The report detailed the secret marriage between her and Ethan, speculating about her origins, her past, and in some sections, insinuating that she was a hired wife to improve the public image of Ethan and Hayes' beauty. The magazine made cruel assumptions about her motivations, suggesting that she was taking advantage of his fame and fortune to advance her own career. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, running nervous fingers across the cover. "They're making up a story that they don't even know the truth." Ethan nodded, his face showing restrained tension. "Unfortunately, that's how the celebrity media works. They take a crumb of information and turn it into a sensationalized narrative." Emma felt exposed in a way she had never imagined. It was invasive, and the offensive insinuations in the report hurt her more than she cared to admit. Throughout the article, journalists raised doubts about her legitimacy as Ethan's wife, even questioning her education and background, as if she were an opportunist who had appeared out of nowhere to steal a place that didn't belong to her. How did they get that photo?" she asked, her voice choked with indignation. And then ran his hand over his forehead, showing frustration. "A paparazzo probably managed to follow her here. That kind of exposure happens. It wasn't what I wanted, but now we need to deal with it." Emma dropped the magazine on the table and sighed, trying to control the mixture of anger and sadness that was growing inside her. She knew the deal with Ethan involved public exposure to a certain extent, but the rawness of it made her question how far she could go before losing a part of herself. "Ethan, they're painting me as if I'm an opportunist, an unscrupulous person," she said, her voice shaking. "I didn't think things could get to this point." He took a step towards her, his eyes filled with sincere concern. "Emma, listen," he began, his tone soft and protective. "I know this is hard, and I'm not going to lie. I didn't see it happening this soon or this way, but I'm here. We're going to get through this together." His words, spoken with such calm and assurance, warmed something inside her. Emma realized that, despite everything, Ethan was by her side, willing to protect her from the storm that was brewing. That attitude surprised her and at the same time made her feel deeply connected to him in a way she hadn't expected. "And what do you suggest we do?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Ethan stared at her for a long moment before responding. "For now, we'll keep a low profile. Let them talk. If we panic or try to respond to every accusation, we'll only give them more fuel." And he paused, taking her hand gently. "If you need anything, I want you to know I'm here." Emma felt comforted by his touch, and the intensity with which he looked at her made her forget, for a moment, all the drama of public exposure. It wasn't just the physical touch that calmed her. It was the fact that he was there, showing himself willing to face the challenge with her. This Ethan, so different from the austere and distant CEO, was someone she was beginning to really get to know, someone who, perhaps, was opening up to her in the same way she was beginning to open up to him. The following days brought a growing wave of attention. On social media, comments and speculation about the wedding were nonstop, and it was impossible to ignore the looks and whispers from office employees. Some were genuinely curious, but many seemed filled with disdain or suspicion. Emma did her best to keep her head up and continue with her work on the design project, but the constant exposure was affecting her deeply. Ethan, sensing the growing tension on her, began to move even closer, trying to shield her from the impact of the situation. He made a point of appearing by her side at internal events, defending her in a subtle but clear way, addressing her with a kindness that did not go unnoticed. The staff noticed the change, and some critical looks began to soften as they saw Ethan treat Emma with a respect that belied the rumors. One night, after a long day at the office, Ethan suggested that they have dinner together, away from the hustle and bustle and prying eyes. They took the meal to his apartment, where they could have a moment of peace. They sat at the small kitchen table, a simple, everyday scene that contrasted with the intensity of the last few days. Ethan poured her a glass of wine, and for a few minutes they talked about the project, as if nothing extraordinary was happening. Eventually, the conversation turned to the inevitable topic. Emma looked at the cup in her hands, hesitating before speaking. "I never imagined myself being involved in something like this. This exposure, the comments, it's all so intense," she said, trying to find the words to describe how she felt. Ethan nodded, understanding the weight of what she was saying. "I know. It's not fair, and I'm sorry you're going through this because of me." Emma looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. It was rare to see him admit any weakness, and even rarer to see him so vulnerable. "It's not your fault," she said, softening her voice. "I think I accepted that when I agreed to the deal. I just didn't know it would be so personal." Ethan watched her in silence, as if weighing each word before responding. "I never wanted this to be difficult for you, Emma, but I need you to know that your presence, your strength, is helping me get through all of this in ways I didn't imagine possible." Emma felt her heart quicken, Ethan's sincerity resonating deeply with her. There was something in his words, in the way he looked at her, that made her realize how close he was getting. That bond, born from a cold agreement, now seemed to gain a warmth that neither of them expected. "Ethan, as strange as this all was, I think I also learned a lot. About you, about me," she said, feeling the words come out without her being able to stop them. "And somehow it made me realize that I can trust you." He looked at her, and for an instant, the world around him seemed to disappear. The depth of that moment was almost tangible, a comfortable silence that spoke more than any conversation. "Emma, trust me, I won't let anyone hurt you," he said in a whisper, his hand resting on hers in a natural but meaningful way. Emma felt a mix of emotions invade her chest. He wanted to respond, to say something that reflected the intensity of his feelings, but words seemed insufficient. Instead, she squeezed his hand, a simple gesture that carried all the gratitude and connection she felt. That night, as everyone went to their respective rooms, Emma couldn't contain the whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. "Every day, I felt that the agreement between them went beyond a simple professional commitment. It was as if something genuine and strong was being born between them, something that perhaps neither of them was prepared to admit. But that was already becoming impossible to ignore." In the days that followed, the media speculation didn't subside, but the trust Ethan showed in her made everything more bearable. Together, they faced the looks and the questions, and Emma realized that his strength was now a part of her too. She felt increasingly safe next to him, and over time, she began to realize that that safety was something she had never imagined finding in anyone. The days became a mix of mixed emotions for Emma. Since the public exposure of the marriage, the moments with Ethan had become increasingly intense, and she found herself involved in feelings that went beyond what she could control. Ethan supported her in every way, being protective and attentive to her needs, especially after the relentless media coverage and harsh comments that some gossip outlets continued to publish. With each gesture of affection and attention, Emma felt that the line that had initially united them began to transform into something deeper and unexpected. But she didn't admit to herself that she was falling in love. She couldn't be, she told herself repeatedly, because this was a marriage of convenience, an act. However, the heart did not follow the same rules as the agreement they had signed. The day started like any other, with Emma immersed in her work on the design project, focused on the new ideas she had developed for the next launch of the cosmetics line. She was totally absorbed when, looking to the side, she noticed Ethan talking at the entrance to the office with an elegant and very familiar woman. She was tall, blonde, and carried a confident posture, perfectly framed by a sophisticated dress that matched her serious face and well-defined features. Emma recognized her immediately. She was Victoria Monroe, the company's director of international relations, and from what she had heard from Olivia and the employees, an old girlfriend of Ethan's. Victoria wore an easy, confident smile as she talked to Ethan, and he seemed welcoming and relaxed, an expression Emma rarely saw from him around other people. The sight of them exchanging smiles and friendly conversations brought up a strange feeling in her chest, something she refused to name, but which felt like a pang of jealousy. The scene seemed too intimate to be just professional, and Emma couldn't help but imagine the past they had shared. A deep uneasiness took over her, mixed with a nervousness that made her stomach turn. Trying to maintain her composure, Emma tried to focus on her work, but every quiet laugh that came from outside seemed to draw her attention back to the hallway. Every now and then, when I looked at the glass in the room, I saw Ethan and Victoria gesturing and exchanging glances as if they were in a personal moment. Emma felt her heart beating faster, a mixture of anxiety and insecurity growing inside her. What was between them, and why did that doubt affect her so much? The end of the day brought an unexpected invitation. Ethan sought her out in her office, and after a brief greeting, said in a casual tone, "Emma, we have a corporate dinner with some investors tonight. I thought it might be a good opportunity for you to get to know some of the influential people in our company better sector." Emma nodded, trying to keep her expression neutral. "Sure, I'll be ready." Ethan watched her for a moment, as if trying to decipher something in her expression, but then nodded in agreement and left. Emma was left alone, taking deep breaths to organize her thoughts. The idea of spending the night with him, and possibly his ex-girlfriend, made her uncomfortable. She knew she needed to be rational, that she had no right to question Ethan's past relationships. But his closeness to Victoria bothered her in a way she couldn't ignore. At that dinner, she felt strangely out of place. Despite Ethan's efforts to include her in conversations and introduce her to investors, he was always by her side, with an attentive and respectful look, But that wasn't enough to appease the restlessness she felt. When Victoria entered the room and approached the head table where Ethan and Emma were sitting, Emma felt her stomach drop again. Victoria approached Ethan with a confident smile and made a playful comment that he responded to with a slight smile. They exchanged a few quick words about a past conference, recalling an event matter-of-factly, as if they were old friends or, worse, people who still shared a special bond. Emma was silent, feeling invisible for a moment. Her mind tried to rationalize the situation, telling herself that this was normal, that Ethan and Victoria were colleagues and had a history. But inside she felt vulnerable and exposed, as if she were observing something she shouldn't. With every laugh and look exchanged between Ethan and Victoria, the insecurity seemed to intensify, and Emma couldn't contain the lump that formed in her throat. Dinner dragged on, and with each moment that Victoria approached Ethan, Emma felt that her presence there became less relevant. When the night finally ended and the guests began to disperse, Emma felt that the atmosphere between her and Ethan had changed. He watched her for a moment, perhaps sensing her discomfort, but didn't mention anything. "Shall we?" he asked, holding her coat to help her put it on. She nodded silently, and the two walked to the car without exchanging a word. On the way back to the apartment, the silence between them was dense, full of unspoken feelings. Emma felt confused and angry with herself for letting such a trivial scene affect her so much. She knew that, technically, she had no right to feel jealous or demand explanations about Ethan's friendships. But the fact that he was so comfortable around Victoria bothered her deeply. When they arrived at the apartment, Ethan noticed Emma's closed expression and frowned, looking intrigued. "Everything is fine?" Emma hesitated, the words bubbling inside her catching in her throat. She wanted to confront him. She wanted to know what the story was between him and Victoria, but she felt paralyzed. She knew that if she did, she would end up exposing what she was feeling, feelings that even she herself wasn't ready to accept. "It's okay," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady even though his expression said otherwise. Ethan watched her for a long moment, his eyes fixed on her as if trying to decipher her thoughts. "Emma, if there's something you need to say, you can say it." His frankness made her even more nervous. Emma looked away, feeling her heart beat faster. She wanted to ask, she wanted an explanation, but something inside her prevented her from saying what she really thought. How could she expose her insecurity without revealing how involved she was? How could I admit that what I felt went beyond a friendship or a formal commitment? "I just need some time for myself," she finally said, before turning away and walking towards the bedroom, leaving him behind, confused and intrigued. As she closed the door, Emma leaned against the wall, trying to calm her racing mind and heart. She knew there was something more between her and Ethan, a deep connection that was growing stronger every day. However, Victoria's presence reopened wounds and insecurities that she tried to hide. She felt torn between her reason and her heart, between the fear of giving herself away and the desire to be by his side. During that night, sleep took a long time to come. Emma tossed and turned in bed, feeling tension building in her thoughts. She knew she was in love, but she didn't know what to do with this feeling that seemed to grow inside her, defying all logic and the barriers she tried to build. On the other side of the apartment, Ethan was also awake, reflecting on Emma's behavior and feeling an uneasiness he couldn't name. He didn't understand the reason behind her sudden distancing, but he felt that something was wrong, something that he, for the first time, didn't know how to resolve. He wondered if, in some way, she was beginning to question herself about the agreement, or perhaps about their relationship and the implications that relationship could have for the future. What they both didn't know was that that night would mark a turning point. Emma began to realize that she couldn't continue hiding her feelings forever, and Ethan, even without knowing exactly what he felt, began to understand that her presence in his life went far beyond a contract. The trip to California was marked by the same silent tension that had built between Ethan and Emma since the corporate dinner. The proposal to travel to a business meeting with important investors in the cosmetic sector had come as a surprise to Emma. Typically, he held the more strategic corporate discussions with the executive team without involving Emma, but this time, He had insisted that she accompany him. He claimed that her perspective on the new design project would add value to the presentation. And she agreed, although she suspected that this decision had a deeper meaning. The trip was long, and the silence that hovered between them on the private jet was heavy, as if there were a world of unspoken words hidden in each avoided glance. In each brief exchange of glances, Emma tried to focus on her project notes, trying to remind herself of the importance of remaining professional. However, she felt her heart beat faster with each discreet movement Ethan made, each calculated gesture, and each brief word he spoke to her. During the hours of flight, she couldn't help but notice the way he glanced at her, as if he too felt the same inexplicable tension that surrounded her. It was as if they were engaged in a silent game of self-denial, where they both knew exactly what they were avoiding. When they arrived in California, Ethan had booked a stay at a luxurious beachfront hotel with expansive views of the ocean. The environment contrasted with the tense atmosphere Emma felt inside, but the beauty of the place helped her relax. However, her room was right next to Ethan's, which only reinforced the feeling of closeness and vulnerability that she had been trying to suppress. The day was filled with meetings and presentations, where both managed to focus on the professional side of the trip, hiding any emotion that could betray the growing connection between them. That night, after dinner with the investors at a fancy restaurant overlooking the ocean, Ethan suggested they take a walk on the hotel deck. They were alone, and the California night brought a warm, pleasant breeze that gently ruffled Emma's hair. She could feel his presence beside her, so close that her heart reacted to each step. The sound of the waves crashing against the rocks below them seemed to amplify the tension that filled the air. And she knew this walk was more than just an attempt to ease the tiredness of the day. As they walked across the deck, Ethan looked at her hesitantly, as if wrestling with an internal dilemma. They stopped in front of an open area where party music echoed from afar, a soft melody that invited dancing. Ethan looked away to the horizon, but then turned to Emma, extending his hand unexpectedly. "Do you want to dance?" he asked, his voice carrying a softness she hadn't expected. Emma hesitated for a moment, surprised by the proposal, but the atmosphere around her and the sincere expression in his eyes dispelled any resistance. "Yes, why not?" she replied, accepting his hand, feeling the warmth of Ethan's fingers as he intertwined hers. He pulled her gently, and soon they were both in a gentle rhythm, following the distant melody. The contact between nearby bodies was intense, and Emma felt Ethan's breath close to her face, the woody smell of his perfume mixed with the sea breeze. The music enveloped them, and each movement made the tension between them grow even more. Ethan's hand slid to her back, holding her firmly but with a tenderness that made her shiver. For a moment, Emma felt vulnerable, as if the entire professional facade and the agreement that united them were disintegrating in the face of that dance. I felt my heart racing, pulsing in the same rhythm as the surrounding waves. Ethan, who always maintained control over everything and everyone, seemed relaxed, almost at peace. But there was something else there, something he was clearly trying to contain. When their eyes met, Emma saw a raw, sincere emotion in his eyes, as if all the barriers he had put up over time were finally giving way. "Emma," he began, his voice almost a whisper, his face just inches from hers. She held her breath, waiting for each word, feeling the weight of that moment, of what he seemed to be about to say. Her heart was pounding, as if she was anticipating something she always wanted to hear, but never imagined would actually happen. It was as if everything they had experienced up to that point had led them to that moment, that almost confession. He hesitated, and she saw the shadow of an internal struggle pass across his face, as if he was trying to find the right words. Ethan took a deep breath, holding her gaze with an intensity that seemed to mean everything he didn't yet have the courage to admit. "All this, what we're experiencing, it's just part of the deal, isn't it?" Emma felt as if the ground beneath her feet disappeared. His words, spoken in such a soft voice, but filled with restraint, brought a wave of confusion and sadness that she couldn't hide. He had once again built the wall she thought he was beginning to tear down. The frankness in his gaze had faded, and Emma realized that Ethan had retreated into the security of the agreement, as if that was the only thing he could still control. With a tight smile, she walked away slightly, trying to hide her disappointment. "Yes, of course," he said, fighting to keep his voice steady and unconcerned. Even though he felt a tightness in his chest, that's what we agreed from the beginning. But inside, she felt broken. I knew that there was something between them that went beyond a contract, that the moments together and the sincere exchanges of glances could not just be part of an agreement. But if he refused to admit it, what could she do? That dance, that moment that should have been a symbol of what they were both beginning to share, now seemed transformed into a bittersweet memory. For a brief moment, silence fell between them, filled with unspoken feelings, until Ethan took a step back, letting go of her hands. He avoided Emma's gaze, as if he were trying to rebuild his own facade, and Emma saw that he was clearly torn, as if he was afraid of what he felt. Still, he chose control over vulnerability, a choice that hurt her deeply. The song had ended, and they both turned in silence, walking back to the hotel. Ethan remained at a distance, as if the dance had never happened, and Emma, hurt by what seemed like a rejection, struggled to control the tears that threatened to escape. Inside the elevator, the two were immersed in an uncomfortable silence, and Emma avoided looking at him, fearing that the intensity of her emotions would be too evident. When they reached the hallway that led to the bedrooms, Ethan stopped and finally looked at her, his expression still filled with something she couldn't fully decipher. "Emma," he began, his voice thick with regret. But before he could say anything, Emma interrupted him, her voice colder and more controlled than she thought possible. "Good evening, Ethan. I think we need some space." She didn't wait for his response and entered her room, closing the door softly behind her. As soon as she was alone, the tears she had been holding back the entire way back finally escaped. She sat on the edge of the bed with her face in her hands, feeling more lost than ever. Why couldn't he see what was in front of him? Why cling to a contract when there was so much more between them? That night, Emma could barely sleep. The image of Ethan, the words he almost said, the dance that seemed like a broken dream, everything remained in her mind, spinning in a whirlwind of feelings that she didn't know how to control. He realized that he was in love, but he knew that that love seemed to have no place in the life of someone as used to control as he was. In the next room, Ethan couldn't sleep either. The weight of his own words and the impact he had seen in Emma's eyes consumed him. He was torn between the desire to allow himself to feel and the fear that giving up control would leave him too vulnerable. He didn't want to lose Emma, but he was afraid to admit that perhaps he was already in more than he could handle. The tension between Ethan and Emma reached a fever pitch the morning after their business trip, and they both knew, albeit silently, that something needed to be resolved. Ethan woke up early, but when he left for the meeting, he didn't find Emma. She had already gone down for breakfast and avoided crossing his path, remaining distant and reserved, an attitude he noticed immediately. He felt the weight of a silent guilt and discomfort that grew as the hours passed, something that made him remember every second of the previous night. He knew deep down he wanted to open up to her, but the words stuck, as if an invisible force was stopping him from being honest about how he really felt. Back in New York, Ethan tried to get back to his routine, but Emma was increasingly distant. She arrived at the office and went straight to the design department, immersed in her responsibilities, almost as if she had isolated herself inside a bubble. Her gaze, before so sweet and attentive, was now cold and controlled. The absence of their informal interactions, complicit glances and moments of closeness, made the environment emptier. Ethan watched her from afar, trying to decipher if her withdrawal was a response to his own inability to open up. He couldn't ignore how much it bothered him, how vital her presence had become, a constant that he didn't even know he needed. That afternoon, the tension finally erupted into a heated argument in the office. Emma, tired of containing her emotions, questioned Ethan about an unprecedented project decision, confronting him directly. Ethan, already shaken by the frustration he had been accumulating, reacted in a cold and defensive manner, which made Emma explode. "You always need control, Ethan. You always want everything to be done according to what you decide, without caring who is next to you. I'm tired of being another piece of your puzzle." Ethan remained silent, but the pain in his eyes was visible. He knew she was right. He knew he had held the reins too tightly. He felt helpless, unable to tell her how much the relationship, however unexpected, had become the most significant aspect of his life. Emma stared at him for a moment, frustration turning into pure hurt. "I need some time, Ethan. I need to get out of here, away from this role you've put me in." Without waiting for a response, Emma grabbed her bag and left, leaving the office in a silence that felt like screaming. Ethan stood there, watching her leave, a feeling of emptiness taking over him. When the door closed behind her, the reality of her absence hit him like a punch. He was used to controlling every aspect of his life, but Emma had become a variable he couldn't control. And for the first time, he felt what it was like to lose something truly valuable. The following days were marked by an absence that Ethan never imagined he would feel so intensely. Daily routines, which had previously been followed with precision and predictability, now seemed incomplete. He found himself waiting to see her in the hallway, to hear her voice in the office, even to meet one of her defiant looks that captivated him so much. But Emma wasn't there, and the apartment they shared was too quiet a space, without her presence to fill the space with her likeness. On the third day, unable to bear the emptiness, Ethan found himself wandering around the apartment, absorbed by memories of the moments they had shared. It was impossible to deny her impact on his life, the way she had changed his days, bringing color and warmth to what had previously been just a cold, calculated routine. He missed the little details, the casual conversations, and the smile she drew from him almost effortlessly. He thought about all the times that, instead of opening up, he preferred silence, pride, defense. He knew that each of these choices had led into the situation he found himself in now, alone, desperately needing her, but not knowing how to win her back. That night, Ethan decided to leave the apartment and take a walk around the city. The busy streets of New York offered a distraction that he hoped would be comforting. But at every corner, at every store he passed, something reminded him of her. An art showcase with canvases that Emma would love. A small bookstore where he imagined her sitting, reading with a coffee next to her. The city seemed to conspire to remind him of her, as if the universe wanted to rub in his face how much her presence had transformed everything around her. It was while walking that, almost without realizing it, he realized a truth that seemed as obvious as it was painful. The contract, that cold, calculated agreement he had proposed, had become irrelevant. What he felt went far beyond any signed paper, any appearance they tried to maintain for others. He wanted Emma for who she was, for everything she represented in his life, and for the love that he finally admitted to himself that he felt. "I knew I needed to do something, but at the same time I felt the weight of uncertainty." How could he convince her that what he felt was real? And perhaps more importantly, how could he show her that he was willing to change, to be the man she deserved? Back at the apartment, Ethan found a photo of her left on his office desk. It was an image from one of the project's last presentations, where she spoke with confidence and passion about her ideas. He remembered how she had earned everyone's respect, how proud he felt seeing her defend her work with determination. The image of her, so strong and full of life, made him realize how incomplete his own life seemed without her by his side. He then decided that at the end of that contract that artificially united them, he would ask her to stay, but not as part of an agreement or out of a need for stability. He would ask her to stay because finally, he understood that it was with her that he wanted to be. But while Ethan tried to organize his emotions and plan what he would say to Emma, she in turn was looking for a moment of peace to process her own feelings. She stayed in a small hotel on the banks of the Hudson, where she spent her days alone, away from the world and the pressure of playing a role. In the silence of the room, she thought about the complex relationship that had arisen between her and Ethan, and the pain she felt when she left him. She knew she was in love and that being away from him was a form of torture, but he also knew that he needed to find his own strength, that he couldn't just be a piece in his universe. The days away from Ethan helped her better understand what she was really looking for. "I wanted to be loved, yes, but not just as part of a contract." She wanted someone who saw her as a partner, as someone with whom she could share her life honestly and authentically. She thought of all the moments they had shared, the dancing, the heartfelt conversations, The nights when he comforted her amid the whirlwind of public exposure. There was something genuine between them, but also a barrier he seemed unable to overcome. Emma knew that if he wasn't willing to open his heart, the love he felt would be of no use. When Ethan finally tried to contact her, Emma resisted at first. She was hurt and unsure about the future, but with each message from him, with each attempt at connection, she felt the impact she had on his life. Finally, he decided to respond, agreeing to meet him for a heart-to-heart. It was time to decide, to expose everything I felt and to listen to what he had to say, without any more barriers or defenses. On the day of the reunion, Ethan was more nervous than ever, aware that that conversation would define the course of their lives. When he saw her enter the cafe where they had agreed to meet, he felt his heart race. She looked as beautiful and strong as ever, but there was a sadness in her eyes that he knew he had caused. Emma sat across from him, not smiling but also not hostile. There was a tense silence between them until Ethan, for the first time, took the initiative to speak. "Emma, he began, his voice trembling, full of emotion. "I know I made a lot of mistakes. I know I pushed you away with my fear, and that maybe I hid what I really felt because I was never taught to give up control. But the truth is, I can't imagine my life without you." Emma looked at him, her eyes slightly teary, but her expression firm. "Ethan, I need to know this is real. I can't just be part of a strategy or someone to fill in what you think you need." Ethan took a deep breath, fighting to keep control of his voice. "You are so much more than any contract, Emma. I know that now, and I regret not showing you that sooner. But I'm here, and I'm willing to give up everything, the control, the barriers, if you're willing to give me a second chance." Emma kept her gaze steady, evaluating his every word. She felt her heart fighting between reason and the love that pulsed inside her. But she saw something in Ethan's eyes that she had never seen before. A genuine vulnerability, a sincere desire to be someone better by her side. Finally, she reached out her hand, intertwining her fingers with his in a silent gesture of acceptance. "One chance," she said, with a shy but hopeful smile. "But we need more than promises, Ethan." He squeezed her hand, feeling a wave of relief and gratitude invade his chest. "I knew the road would be long and that they would need to build that relationship with honesty and patience. But for the first time, he was willing to try to fight for something that really mattered." That night, after their conversation at the cafe, Emma and Ethan walked together through the streets of New York. The city was bright, with traffic and the constant murmur of people, creating a vibrant, almost welcoming atmosphere. They walked side by side, without rushing, still absorbing the impact of the words exchanged during their reunion. Each step was filled with hesitation and a strange calm, as if they both knew they had finally broken down the barriers that kept them apart, but still needed to explore the new territory that opened up between them. Ethan, normally so collected and confident, now looked slightly nervous. He put his hands in his coat pockets, looking away at the signs of the shops and cafes around him, finding the courage to speak. Emma watched every gesture, every silent expression of vulnerability he let slip. She felt that, for the first time, she was next to someone who wasn't afraid of being human, who, despite all her mistakes, was willing to show herself to be true to her. Finally, Ethan broke the silence, stopping in front of a small, illuminated flower stand. "Emma," he said, his voice low, almost as if each word required genuine effort, "I really need you to understand that everything that's happened so far has been my fault. I was so scared of losing you that I ended up trying to keep you at a distance." Emma listened, absorbing each word with intense attention. It was what she always wanted to hear, not empty excuses, but an admission that he understood the impact of his actions. "Ethan," she began, choosing her words carefully, "I just wanted you to let me in. I know you grew up with this need for control, but we both know you can't control everything, especially what we feel." Ethan nodded, looking at her with a sincerity that seemed unprecedented. "I never knew how to deal with my feelings," he admitted, his voice tinged with frustration. "Since taking over the company, my only focus has been to keep everything under control. I thought that by keeping a firm stance, no one would see how lost I really felt. And then you showed up and showed me that life is not a line straight, that emotions, no matter how much we ignore them, are there, demanding to be felt. Emma gave a small smile, feeling the warmth of Ethan's honesty warm her own heart. You don't have to be perfect all the time, she said, lightly touching his arm. I prefer to see your imperfections. It's what makes you real, Ethan, and it's what makes me want to be by your side, because no one can carry everything alone. Ethan took a deep breath, as if her words had lifted a weight from his chest. For a moment, he was silent, absorbing the power of that simple truth. I want to try, Emma, he said finally. I want to open up, but I don't know how to do it all at once. Everything I've built in my life has been built on top of this posture of control, and letting go is more difficult than I expected. She looked at him with understanding, seeing the inner conflict he was struggling to express. I knew he wouldn't change overnight, that the process would be gradual and full of ups and downs. But seeing him so sincere, I felt a growing hope that he at least was willing to try. That was all she needed to hear. Ethan, I don't expect you to change overnight, she replied with a soft smile. I just want you to be true to me and true to yourself. We're not in a race. We're building something, and I just want that to be real for both of us. He held her hand, intertwining their fingers, an intimate gesture full of meaning. Thank you, Emma, for not giving up on me. I don't think I can explain how much this means to me. Emma squeezed his hand back, feeling relieved, as if they had finally reached a place of genuine understanding. I knew that the road ahead would still have challenges, but that night marked a beginning, a step that they were both ready to take together, with honesty and transparency. When they arrived at the building where they lived, Ethan stopped at the entrance, hesitating before making an unexpected invitation. Want to go upstairs with me? We can talk more, maybe even watch a movie. Something simple. Emma smiled, surprised and touched by the suggestion. Yes, I would love to. They went up to the apartment, and once inside, the environment seemed transformed. The same space that had once witnessed so many arguments and misunderstandings now felt welcoming, as if they could finally relax and be themselves. Ethan made them both a cup of tea, and Emma chose a light film without much pretension, something that would allow them to relax without pressure. They sat on the sofa next to each other in silence, each with a cup in hand. The film started, but the eyes frequently left the screen, turning to each other. It was as if the physical proximity was enough, as if they finally didn't need words to understand the depth of what they were building. During one especially funny scene, Emma laughed in a carefree manner, and Ethan couldn't help but smile at the sight. That laugh, that lightness she brought with her, was what he valued most about her. He felt completely disarmed, as if he was finally accepting that he had found a person who made him want to be different, not because of pressure, but because, with her, he finally saw a path where he could be himself. Emma, he said, in a moment of impulse, interrupting her laughter. I never imagined I could feel so at peace with someone. With you, I feel like I can be more than the man everyone expects me to be. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting surprise and emotion. I knew those words came from a deep place, from a feeling that he tried to communicate in the best way possible. She touched his face gently, stroking his skin with her thumb. I always knew there was more to you, Ethan. That's why I never gave up, because I saw something that maybe even you didn't see yourself. He took a deep breath, letting her hand linger on his face, feeling her touch like an anchor that connected him to something far greater than he had ever experienced. Slowly, he approached her and, in an almost hesitant movement, touched his lips to hers, in a soft kiss full of contained emotions. It wasn't an explosion of passion, but a kiss that conveyed security, affection, and the beginning of something that he knew would last. When they pulled away, they both kept their eyes closed for a few seconds, as if they wanted to prolong the moment as long as possible. That kiss wasn't just a physical act. It was a silent promise, a tacit agreement that, from that moment on, both would be willing to try to build something true and profound, regardless of what the past or internal barriers might suggest. Ethan, she murmured, still with her eyes closed, feeling his breath so close. I know what we have isn't going to be easy, but I'm willing to try, as long as you are too. He held her hand firmly, his expression determined. "I'm more than willing, Emma. I'll do whatever it takes to make it work, because you're the only person who makes me want to be someone better." Emma opened her eyes, smiling slightly, feeling her heart racing, but full of hope. For the first time, she was sure that Ethan was willing to be honest, and that was the basis she always wanted. He felt that they were finally ready to face the future together, no matter what challenges they might encounter. The night continued peacefully, and they both allowed themselves to relax, enjoying each other's company without rushing, without expectations, just with their presence. They knew that the path they had chosen was new and unknown, but they trusted each other, and that trust was what would sustain each step from then on. At the end of the night, when they said goodbye, Ethan held her hand for a moment longer, as if he still didn't want to let her go. "Emma, thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." She smiled, feeling her heart warm, and answered sincerely, "I will always believe in you, Ethan. I just hope you continue to believe in us too." As she left the apartment, they both carried a certainty in their chests. The love that was growing between them didn't need any more promises. All he needed was sincerity and willingness so that they could finally build together the story they so desired. The days following Ethan and Emma's mutual commitment were marked by a new, silent understanding between them. The tension had dissolved, giving way to a genuine partnership. But peace in the relationship was accompanied by a storm at the office. Ethan had received alarming news about Hayes Beauty's financial situation. An emergency meeting with the investor team revealed that one of the main financiers was about to withdraw its support, which would put the company in a precarious situation and seriously threaten future projects. Ethan felt the weight of the consequences of what this could entail. The hard work of years, the responsibility for each employee, and the family's own reputation, built generation after generation, were at risk. He barely managed to sleep that night, returning to the apartment in a state of frustration and anxiety that he tried to hide, but that Emma soon noticed. When he plopped down on the couch, she walked over to him, her gaze full of understanding and support. Ethan hesitated, but finally confessed the weight of the situation. "The company is at risk of losing one of our biggest investors," he said, his voice thick with concern. "They believe that the market has changed and that the product line we offer is outdated. They are threatening to withdraw support if we don't come up with something innovative enough for new consumers." Emma listened to him carefully, feeling the seriousness of the situation and the emotional weight he carried. "I knew this wasn't just a financial problem. For Ethan, it was a matter of honor and legacy." She thought for a moment, reflecting on what they could do, and then remembered the proposals she had suggested during the development of the design project. The idea of creating a line of products that brought a deeper message, something that talked about authenticity, sustainability, and connection seemed to fit perfectly with what Hayes Beauty needed to win over younger consumers who are aware of these issues. "Ethan," she said, in a confident voice that caught his attention, "I have some ideas. I know the design project was an important part, but what if we expanded this concept? What if we invested in a cosmetics line that really brought a different message? Something that aligns with what the current public values, like sustainability, natural ingredients, and even inclusivity." He looked at her, clearly intrigued. "Do you think such a major redesign would make sense? We can't risk losing our brand identity." Emma nodded, aware of his concerns, but filled with a conviction that was growing in her chest. "I'm not talking about abandoning the company's identity, but about updating that identity, transforming what we already have into something that resonates with current values. Consumers want to feel that their choices matter, and we can provide that. We could create a line with biodegradable packaging, cruelty-free ingredients, and a clear message of personal empowerment." Ethan reflected for a moment, absorbing her words. There was a determination in Emma's eyes that gave him confidence, something he knew the company also needed at that moment. "It's a bold idea, Emma, and risky, but maybe it's the risk we need to take." The following day, both dedicated themselves fully to developing the new proposal. They worked side by side, exchanging ideas and formulating detailed plans to launch a line that would revolutionize Hayes Beauty's image. The intense collaboration brought a different proximity, a partnership that transcended the personal relationship, also becoming a commitment to the company's future. Emma led the design team with renewed energy, sharing her ideas for sustainable packaging and a campaign that reflected diversity and inclusion. They worked on a narrative that combined beauty, care, and authenticity, something that modern consumers were looking for. Ethan, in turn, coordinated the financial aspect, adjusting budgets and preparing a presentation plan for investors. As the ideas took shape, he realized how essential Emma was not only to the project, but to the entire new direction the company was taking. During those days of hard work, the moments between Ethan and Emma became rare but profound. Exchanging quick glances, encouraging smiles, and words of support became the ways they communicated while surrounded by the team. But every night, when they returned to the apartment, they discussed the details of the project until late, often falling asleep on the couch, side by side, as if their shared energy was the fuel that kept them both motivated. One night, after hours of planning and budget restructuring, Ethan closed his laptop and looked at Emma, who was beside him, lost in notes and drafts. He looked at her profile, the concentration in her eyes and the lightness in her movements, and he felt a wave of gratitude and admiration that he couldn't describe. Emma wasn't just there for him. She was there because she believed in that project as much as he did. "Emma," he began, interrupting her work for a moment. "I never imagined we'd be able to do this. You've brought a fresh perspective, and I don't know how to thank you." She smiled, putting down her pen and looking at him with a tenderness that seemed to lighten up their tiredness. "We're in this together, Ethan. I want this to work as much as you do, not just for what it means for the company, but for what it means for us." Ethan nodded, touched by her sincerity. He felt an almost uncontrollable urge to get closer, to kiss her, but he held himself back, aware of the commitment they had made to their work. The future of Hayes Beauty was in their hands, and despite how they felt, they knew the company needed them right now too. The presentation to investors was scheduled for the following week, and the days leading up to the meeting were intense. Both slept little, with their minds always focused on final adjustments to the proposal and strategies to respond to any questions from investors. The design team, now fully involved in Emma's project, was enthusiastic, embracing her vision and actively collaborating to ensure everything was perfect. Little by little, Emma became a reference in the office, and Ethan noticed with pride how employees began to respect and admire the competence and passion she brought to work. When the day of the performance finally arrived, the atmosphere was full of anticipation. Emma and Ethan dressed elegantly and professionally, reflecting the seriousness and importance of that moment for the company. When they arrived at the conference room, investors were already waiting for them, with cautious looks and reserved expressions. Emma felt her heart race, but Ethan discreetly held her hand, offering her a silent gesture of support. The presentation began with Ethan introducing the need for a strategic overhaul, explaining the impact of adapting to new market values, and how Hayes Beauty could position itself in an innovative and authentic way. Emma then took the floor, clearly and confidently explaining the new product line and the proposal for a campaign that would emotionally connect with consumers. He presented sketches of ecological packaging, conceptual photos, and highlighted the commitment to sustainability and diversity that the new cosmetics line would bring. The passion and conviction in his voice was undeniable, and Ethan couldn't help but feel proud as he watched the investors' reaction. After the presentation ended, the room remained silent for a few moments, with investors absorbing every detail. Then one of the oldest among them, for his rigidity, finally broke the silence. "I admit I was skeptical about this makeover," he said, looking between them both. "But I see that Hayes Beauty is willing to evolve with the times. This is a bold vision, and I fully support the project." Other investors agreed, and Ethan and Emma exchanged looks of relief and satisfaction. The final decision was to maintain support for Hayes Beauty, with conditions that both considered fair. At the end of the meeting, Ethan shook hands with each of the investors, expressing his gratitude with sincere words, while Emma, next to him, felt a surge of accomplishment and pride. Back at the apartment that night, the adrenaline was still pumping through both of them, but the feeling was different. It wasn't just the relief that the company was saved. but the recognition that they had achieved it together as a true team. The new phase of the company, built with Emma's ideas and Ethan's support, symbolized not only the future of Hayes Beauty, but also the beginning of a new phase in their relationship. When they were finally alone, Ethan approached her, holding Emma's hands gently, his eyes filled with a deep emotion that he no longer tried to hide. "Emma, none of this would have happened without you. And I'm not just talking about the company, but about me. I wouldn't be who I am today without you by my side." Emma smiled, excited, feeling that finally all the barriers between them had fallen. "And I wouldn't have made it this far without you, Ethan. We're together, and that's what makes it all worth it." They kissed, a kiss full of promises and true love, sealing the beginning of a future that they were both ready to build. The success of the performance brought new energy to Ethan and Emma's lives, and a sense of relief permeated them. The days that followed were full of small celebrations and moments of complicity, as if finally they were experiencing the fullness of what they had always sought together. However, despite all his recent achievements, Ethan still carried unresolved tension. Something in him seemed to hesitate, a remnant of insecurity and duty that pulled him back to the past. The approval of his mother, Margaret. Margaret Hayes was a woman of influence and control, the kind of person who always hoped to see her own values reflected in her son's choices. And even after the new phase that Ethan and Emma had built together, he knew that his mother still saw Emma as an intruder, someone outside the family's carefully maintained circle. When Margaret asked them both to come to her house for dinner, Ethan noticed the dry and critical tone in her voice and felt a chill down his spine, a sign that that night would not be easy. Emma accepted the invitation, but felt a veiled tension in the air. He knew of Margaret's aversion to her, although Ethan had tried to downplay his mother's resistance on several occasions. However, after everything they've been through and her recent victory with the company, Emma was willing to stand up to Margaret and show that she was by Ethan's side out of love and not ambition. Margaret's reception was cold. With each exchange of glances, Emma felt the silent judgment, the contempt hidden beneath the mask of formality that Ethan's mother wore so well. At dinner, Margaret made a point of reinforcing, in small comments and hints, how much she valued the tradition of the Hayes family, making it clear that, in her eyes, Emma was not part of it. Ethan tried to lighten the mood with small interference, but his mother continued with her disguised criticism, every word seeming like an attempt to make Emma feel inadequate. At one point, when the dinner was becoming unbearably tense, Margaret decided to be more direct, staring at Emma as she spoke. "You know, Emma, I always imagined Ethan with someone who understood the weight of our family. Someone who understood what it means to be part of a legacy, of a story that goes beyond individual achievements." Emma swallowed hard, but kept her posture firm. "With all due respect, Miss Hayes, I believe the true value of a legacy lies in who we choose to side with us. And Ethan and I have already shown what we can build together." Margaret raised an eyebrow, clearly dissatisfied with the answer. "Building something, my dear, is very different from belonging to something. Belonging means more than contributing to an idea or a project. Belonging means sacrificing yourself, living up to expectations, understanding that certain positions require renunciation." Emma felt a wave of frustration build up in her chest, but before she could respond, Ethan intervened. "Mom, we've discussed this before. Emma has proven that she has my back and understands what Hayes Beauty stands for. The company is so much stronger with her, and frankly, so is my life." Margaret turned to him, her gaze challenging. "Ethan, you know I've always wanted what's best for you. And I've always imagined that love for our family would make you able to choose the right path. I wonder if you've really thought about what's best for all of us." Those words were a silent stab to Ethan. No matter how much he tried to show that he was determined, the doubt that his mother sowed in every word made him question. He knew how he felt about Emma. He knew how vital she was in his life, but he felt the weight of his mother's responsibility and judgment, as if the love he felt was still something he needed to justify. Emma noticed Ethan's hesitation and felt her heart sink. She hoped he would stand firmly by her side, that he would show his mother that their commitment was not just a partnership, but true love. But instead, he remained silent, his eyes shifting from hers to the table, as if somehow the weight of his mother's words were pulling him back into the role of obedient son. Feeling alone and hurt, Emma got up from the table, her gaze firm and determined. "I think it's clear enough, Mrs. Hayes. Ethan, I hope from the bottom of my heart that you understand what you really want." She left Margaret's house without looking back, but with tears beginning to pool in her eyes. The walk to the apartment was silent and full of confused thoughts. She knew Ethan loved her, but the burden of seeing him hesitate to stand by her side made her doubt whether he could face family barriers and accept their love as a priority. Ethan followed her into the apartment, trying to find the right words to explain the situation. Deep down, he knew he had made a mistake by not clearly showing his support for her, but he was torn between the love he felt and the need to live up to his mother's expectations. Upon entering the apartment, he found Emma silent, her gaze distant as she packed some things in her bag. "Emma," he said, his voice shaking, "please don't jump to conclusions. My mom has certain expectations, and I need time to sort that out." She turned to him, tears contained but pain evident in her expression. "Ethan, we've been through it all together, and I've been by your side through every difficult moment. But now, after everything, you still can't choose. I can't be an added burden to your internal struggle anymore. I wish I was by your side, but it seems like I'm just a person you need to justify." He took a step toward her, desperate. "Emma, please. I just need time to figure this out. I don't want you to leave. Everything we've built, what we have, I want this. I want you." She closed her eyes, feeling the pain of the decision she needed to make. She loved Ethan, but she knew she couldn't continue by his side without him being ready to let go of external pressures and face everything alongside her. "I want that too, Ethan, but I don't want to be someone you hide or justify. I need someone who will be with me without hesitation." Ethan couldn't respond. His chest felt tight, the fear of losing Emma growing every second. But the barrier he had always carried was still there, making it difficult for him to take the necessary step to hold her for good. In silence, he watched Emma finish packing her bag and walk through the door, leaving him alone with the weight of his own choices and the realization of the devastating absence she left behind. The days that followed were lonely and bitter for both of them. Emma walked away, looking for space to collect herself and understand what she really needed for herself. "I felt a deep sadness, but also a growing determination to accept nothing less than complete and unreserved love." Meanwhile, Ethan, isolated and consumed with regret, reflected on how much his hesitation and constant need for approval had harmed him. The days turned into weeks, and the void that Emma had left only intensified the certainty that he loved her irrevocably, and that, this time, if she came back, he wouldn't hesitate. Every corner of the apartment, every detail of the routine they had created together, brought back memories of Emma and everything they had experienced. Her absence was a painful reminder of what he had let slip, and the loneliness made him face his own fragility and the reasons he had always prioritized his mother's control and approval. Finally, he understood that if he really wanted to build a life with Emma, he needed to be willing to leave the past behind and experience the love that was before him. Determined to repair what he had destroyed, Ethan hatched a plan to get closer to her, and this time, show that he was ready to be the man she deserved. The days following Emma's departure were like a plunge into the depths of loneliness for Ethan. He remained silent most of the time, isolated in an apartment that, without her, felt like an empty shell. The absence of her laughter, small spontaneous comments, and affectionate looks left a void that no busy routine could fill. He tried to immerse himself in his work, but his concentration dissolved in every corner of the office, where the memory of Emma was embedded. One particularly difficult morning, Ethan walked to Emma's desk. Her absence seemed palpable there, in the space where she created with passion and dedication, and he felt flooded with a guilt that was finally making itself clear. She wasn't just part of the job or the company. Emma had become the center of the most profound change he had ever experienced. Someone who forced him to face the truth about himself, and it was this truth that now haunted him. He had hesitated to give her the support she deserved, opting instead to try to stay between two lives, one in which he tried to please everyone, and another in which she, and only she, was the most important person. From that moment on, Ethan was immersed in honest and painful reflection. He had always placed family values, his mother's wishes and inherited duties above himself and who he really was. He had grown up believing that his mother's love and approval were the pillars of his life, and that without it, he would be adrift. But now, without Emma, he realized he had lost more than her presence. He had lost his own chance to be happy. In the weeks that followed, he decided to seek help. She began having sessions with a therapist, something she initially considered a weakness, but soon proved liberating. In these conversations, he began to understand the reason why his life had always been guided by invisible fears: the fear of disappointing, of not measuring up, of losing control. He confronted memories he had avoided for years. Memories of a demanding father and a mother who cultivated rigorous, unattainable expectations. And for the first time, he allowed himself to question the validity of it all. Was it really love that her mother demanded? Or was it a form of control, of dominance, of reaffirming a power that she needed to have over him? These reflections were painful, but necessary. He realized that he had to let go of these emotional ties to finally be free to live the love he felt for Emma. I now understood that, to be with her, I needed to face the world head-on, without the filter of other people's expectations. The transformation inside him was slow, but he knew that when he came looking for her again, he needed to be a new man. Someone willing to face whatever it took to deserve the place that Emma had offered him in her life. One night, after one of these intense sessions, Ethan made a decision he knew would be crucial. He needed to confront his own mother, expose the truth about how much he had let her influence his relationships, his choices, and most importantly, how he had allowed her opinions to be the limit of what he thought was acceptable for himself. It was time to cut the last chain that kept him tied to the past. It wouldn't be an easy conversation, and he knew Margaret would likely react with resistance and disappointment. However, he also knew that this step was essential to leaving the weight of his old limitations behind. On the day of the meeting, Ethan entered his parents' house with a heavy heart, but a firmness that he had never felt before. Margaret was waiting for him in the living room, a neutral expression on her face. He watched her for a moment, absorbing the figure of the woman he had so admired and feared for so many years, and who was now the last obstacle he needed to overcome. "We need to talk," he said, in a tone that was both firm and respectful. Margaret looked at him suspiciously, as if she hadn't expected this seriousness from him. "Ethan, if this is about Emma, we've already discussed it enough. She's just a temporary distraction that you misinterpreted as something lasting." Ethan took a deep breath, feeling her resistance like a weight, but this time, he would not back down. "No, Mom, I didn't misinterpret anything. Emma is the person I chose, and who I choose is not your decision. I need you to understand that I am no longer seeking your approval to live my life or to be with anyone else. I love." Margaret's expression changed, her eyes narrowed. "So you're going to turn your back on your family for a woman who doesn't even know what it's like to live for the legacy we've built? Ethan, you've always been a good son. Don't waste everything I've done for you for someone who you'll never understand what it's like to be part of something so big." Ethan remained calm, his voice calm but carrying the conviction that Margaret had never seen in him before. "I always wanted to be the perfect son. I always worried about doing everything the way you thought it should be done. But in trying to please you, I forgot about myself. And with Emma, I discovered what it's like to feel truly complete. She is not a distraction. She is the woman I choose. And I don't want to live another life divided between what you want and what I want for myself." Margaret looked at him with an expression of frustration and perhaps a touch of sadness. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice cold, almost resigned. Ethan nodded, accepting her words but not letting them shake him. "That's my mistake to make, Mom. And if you can't support me, then I'll do it alone." He left the house with a feeling of freedom he had never experienced. He knew that things might never be the same between him and his mother, but that was a price he was willing to pay to live fully with Emma. When he got into the car, he felt as if he were finally in charge of his own destiny, capable of making his choices and fighting for the people and dreams he wanted. Without waiting any longer, he drove to the address where Emma was staying. determined to show her that he was ready to be the man she always deserved. With every kilometer that brought him closer to her, Ethan's heart beat faster, anxious and regretful for everything it had taken him so long to understand. When he arrived, he took a deep breath and went up to her room, his hands slightly shaking as he knocked on the door. Emma opened it, surprised to see him there. Her gaze was wary, but Ethan also noticed a spark of emotion in her eyes that he recognized well. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" He stared at her, emotion overflowing but not hesitating in his words. "Emma, I didn't come to ask you for forgiveness for the choices I made, because I know it won't fix everything. But I came to tell you that I finally chose. I chose you. I spoke to my mother today. I made it clear that you are the person I'm with. I want to be. I'm no longer tied to her expectations. I'm free, and I want you to know that I'll do whatever it takes to win you back, to prove to you that I'm ready." Emma remained silent, absorbing every word, but Ethan noticed the emotion she was trying to hide. "Ethan, there were so many promises, so many moments when I hoped you would finally be with me without barriers. I don't know if I can trust one more promise." He nodded, understanding her hesitation, and stepped forward, gently holding Emma's hands. "I understand, and I'm not going to ask you to trust me just because I said I've changed. I want to show you, Emma. I'll start over if I have to. I'll show you that this time, there are no more divisions, no more barriers. There's another life that I need to sacrifice myself for. Everything I want, everything I am now is here with you." She looked at him, and when she saw the sincerity in his eyes, she felt the weight of her sorrows beginning to dissolve. It wasn't easy, and she knew it would take time to rebuild what had been broken. But she also felt that he was finally willing to fight. No empty promises, no excuses, just the truth, naked and raw. The truth of a man who finally gave himself to love. "So, let's start slowly," she said, with a small smile, allowing hope to rise within her. Ethan returned the smile, feeling an indescribable joy. He knew they still had a long way to go, but for the first time, he was completely sure that he would do everything he could to build a life with her, a true and shared life. After that reunion so full of feelings and confessions, Ethan and Emma decided to proceed slowly, as she had asked. Ethan was more determined than ever to show, not just with words, but with actions, how willing he was to build a life with her, without the barriers he himself had erected. He understood that promises would not be enough. She needed to see, day after day, that the change was real, that he was a new man, and that every gesture, every choice from then on, would be dedicated to winning her back completely. In the days that followed, Ethan put effort into small gestures that meant a lot to Emma. For the first time, he appeared at moments she hadn't expected, demonstrating a lightness and spontaneity that surprised and delighted her. He would leave discreet messages on her desk in the office, like an invitation for coffee, or a quote that made her smile and feel like he was really there. And whenever their eyes met, there was a sincerity in his eyes that brought back that sparkle that Emma had always loved, but that had been lost for so long in the doubts and tensions of the past. One afternoon, Ethan showed up unexpectedly at the small art gallery that Emma used to frequent in her free time. A discreet gallery where she enjoyed walking among the canvases and sculptures. When she saw him there, standing in front of a work of intense colors, with his hands in his pockets and a smirk that only he knew how to give, she felt her heart speed up, but tried to maintain a casual posture. "You around here?" she asked, with a tone of slight surprise. He turned to her, eyes lighting up. "I wanted to understand what fascinates you so much about this place. I thought getting to know you more about your passions would help prove that I'm here through and through." Emma smiled, feeling the sincere affection in his words. They walked through the gallery together, discussing the colors, shapes, and inspirations of the works. For Emma, that conversation, light and unpretentious, revealed an authentic connection between them, something she had wanted to experience for a long time. Ethan was finally allowing herself to share not just the work and problems of life, but the little details, the passions that shaped who she was. It was as if every moment with him was a new discovery, a new opportunity to connect more deeply. One afternoon, while working side by side on yet another proposal for an innovative haze beauty project, Ethan did something unexpected. At the end of a meeting, after all the other employees had left the room, he discreetly called her and handed her an envelope. Emma picked it up, intrigued, and opened it to discover a pair of passages to a destination near the coast. "I know we're still taking things one step at a time, but I thought maybe a quick trip could give us some time to breathe, to talk away from all this. No pressure, just the two of us." Emma hesitated, her heart torn between expectation and caution. But when she saw Ethan's genuine smile and hopeful look, she nodded, feeling touched by his intention. "I knew he was trying his best to get back what they had lost." At the weekend, they left for the small coastal town where the sea breeze, the simple landscapes, and the peaceful environment seemed to conspire to bring them even closer. They spent the day walking along the beach, talking about everything and nothing, sharing stories and memories that they had never exchanged. With each laugh that escaped between them, Emma noticed that Ethan's emotional barrier seemed more and more distant. He was there completely, without hesitation, without reservations. It was as if, finally, he had allowed himself the freedom to live that relationship. At the end of the day, at sunset, they sat on a small hill overlooking the sea. The sky, dyed in golden and pink tones, seemed a perfect reflection of the moment they were living in. The silence between them was comfortable, as if nothing more needed to be said, until Ethan, after a few moments contemplating the horizon, turned to her, his eyes reflecting the intensity of the moment. "Emma," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "since you came into my life, I have transformed in ways I never imagined possible. And now, after all the time, after so many doubts and struggles, I want nothing more than to be by your side, completely, without the shadows of the past." She looked at him, feeling her heart beat faster, and saw a sincerity in his eyes that dispelled any insecurity she might still have. Ethan moved closer, his hand sliding into hers, holding it tenderly. "I'm sorry it took me so long to understand how much you mean to me, and I don't want you to believe that just because of what I'm saying. I want you to see day after day how committed I am to making it work." Emma felt a deep emotion and let him wash over her, his words warming her heart like nothing else could. She felt complete, as if everything they had been through was preparation for that moment. With a smile that conveyed everything she felt, she responded with a sincerity that made her eyes shine. "I believe in you, Ethan. I always have. And I'm ready for us to start over, together." Without hesitating any longer, Ethan pulled her close, and their lips met in a deep and true kiss. A kiss that sealed everything they had faced, everything they had built, and most importantly, everything that was yet to come. At that moment, there were no more doubts, no more hurt or hesitation. They were there, whole, experiencing a love that they both knew would resist any obstacle. When they pulled away, still hugging each other, Ethan placed his forehead against hers, closing his eyes as if he wanted to absorb every second of that moment. "I promise I'll never let anything come between us again. You're the love of my life, Emma, and I won't waste this chance." Emma looked at him, smiling with genuine joy. For the first time, I felt that they were both at peace, ready to move forward together, building a story based on truth, respect, and a love that they could finally live without reservations. They spent the rest of the trip as if time had slowed down. Every moment together felt like a gift, a reflection of what they always wanted. They shared laughs, glances, conversations about the future, and most of all, the silent commitment to remain by each other's side, no matter what. They knew the journey had been long and full of ups and downs, but that only made their love even stronger, a force that would unite them forever. When they returned to New York, they were both transformed. Ethan was ready to face the world alongside Emma without hesitation, and she, now more secure and confident, knew that the future they would build together would be a true partnership, where they would both support and love each other as they always dreamed. After the trip to the coast, Ethan and Emma returned to New York with renewed energy. Their relationship, now free from constraints and hesitations, radiated trust and complicity, also reflected in their work at Hayes Beauty. Since Ethan had decided to truly fight for Emma and the life he wanted with her, the two became partners not only in love, but also in the mission of transforming the company into something great and meaningful for both of them. Emma brings a refreshing and innovative vision to Haze Beauty's upcoming launches, leveraging her sensitivity to changing market values and behaviors. She knew that consumers were looking for more than just beauty products. They wanted brands that understood their emotional needs and valued their conscious choices. Ethan, by her side, supported and encouraged each idea, integrating Emma's bold, creative side with the solid, refined structure he knew so well. With the decision to launch a line inspired by nature, free of toxic components and focused on sustainability, the two embarked on a creation process that required dedication and hard work. The packaging was designed with recyclable and visually appealing materials, and the products had poetic names that evoked nature, such as Aurora, Brisa Pura, and Essentia du Amanhesser. Emma took care of every detail, from design to campaign concept, while Ethan coordinated the budget and worked on marketing strategies that positioned the line as a revolution for the brand. The environment in the office also seemed to reflect their new phase. Employees noticed Ethan's transformation. The man who had previously maintained an impassive facade now seemed more approachable, human, and even a little relaxed. The pride he felt at Emma's side was evident, and the team began to see her not just as the CEO's wife, but as a fundamental partner in the company's growth. Ethan made a point of highlighting his contributions in meetings and valuing his opinions, making it clear that Emma was not just a presence at his side, but an indispensable part. The months that followed the line's development were intense and challenging, but the energy that Emma and Ethan shared made the process lighter. The two spent hours at the office, often working late, but at a pace that combined efficiency with fun. Between meetings and important decisions, they exchanged looks and smiles that revealed how much they were in tune. Sometimes they shared a quick meal amidst spreadsheets and product samples, laughing over small nonsense and making plans about the future of the company and the life they wanted to build together. On the day of the launch of the new line, the event was held in an iconic location in New York, a space overlooking the city that symbolized the grand vision they had for the project. The decor was elegant, with natural plant arrangements and soft tones that reflected the line's sustainability concept. Journalists, influencers, and investors were present, and the expectation was palpable. Emma felt a mix of nervousness and excitement as she observed the place, aware that this was one of the most important moments of her career. Ethan noticed her anxiety and walked over, holding her hand in a firm, comforting way. "You've turned this into something extraordinary, Emma. And today, we're going to show the world what Haze Beauty really stands for." He smiled, conveying a calmness that made her relax. The presentation was a success. Ethan opened the event, talking about the company's trajectory and the importance of adapting to new times. He then called Emma to talk about the development of the new line and the concept that guided it. She spoke with passion and confidence, explaining how each product had been designed to promote the connection between beauty, nature, and well-being. The public response was immediate, and warm. Journalists took notes. Influencers commented on social media in real time, and investors seemed impressed by the clarity and depth of the vision. The night concluded with praise and promises of partnerships. At the end of the event, as the venue's lights dimmed and guests left, Ethan and Emma were alone for a moment, observing the illuminated city. They felt exhausted, but fulfilled, and their mutual satisfaction was evident. He turned to her, his eyes shining with pride and excitement. "Emma, I have never been so proud of anything in my life. This was a success not only because of the company, but because of everything it represents for us." She hugged him, feeling the gratitude and complicity that united them. "This project is much more than I imagined it could be. But Ethan, none of this would have been possible without you by my side. You believed in my ideas when I didn't even know if they would work." He laughed, holding her even tighter. "I always believed in you, and now I see that. Together, we are much stronger than we imagined." The following months were marked by positive results and a fantastic response from the market. The sustainable line not only increased sales, but also repositioned Haze Beauty's image as an innovative and relevant brand. Specialized media praised the company's vision, and public engagement grew rapidly. Ethan and Emma, working together as an unbeatable team, became an example of modern leadership where respect, admiration, and mutual love were so visible that they inspired everyone around them. In addition to business success, their relationship had achieved a stability that they both always desired. Now, on quiet nights at home, they could relax and celebrate victories without the weight of doubts or insecurities. The small shared routines, cooking together, watching movies, walking around the city, became the foundation of a life together that they both built with care and dedication. Emma, who previously felt torn between love and fear of not being accepted, now felt complete with a man who finally saw her completely and respected her as a partner in every aspect. Ethan, in turn, felt happier than he ever thought possible. The control he once thought was indispensable had transformed into confidence, and he discovered that living without the emotional barriers that separated him from people was liberating. He admired Emma's every idea, every detail of the unique way she saw the world, and knew that, with her, the future was something he really wanted to live, regardless of the challenges that might arise. As the end of the year approached, Hayes Beauty held a special meeting with all employees. Ethan and Emma decided to make an official announcement, thanking each team member for their hard work and commitment to the company's new phase. At the end, Ethan asked to speak, and with a smile that showed all his happiness, he looked at Emma before speaking. "Today, I want to thank not only our team, but someone very special who made all of this a reality. Emma, you brought a new vision, a passion that propelled Hayes Beauty to a place I never even imagined possible. And beyond, this has brought meaning to my life that goes far beyond work." He approached her, taking her hand in front of everyone, while the team watched with smiles and sighs. "Emma, by your side, I discovered that true strength lies in being who we really are, without masks, without fears. And I want everyone here to know that by your side, I found more than a partner. I found the love that transforms and that gives meaning to everything." Emma smiled, excited, as applause echoed throughout the room. She felt completely loved and accepted, not just as a part of her personal life, but as an essential force helping to shape the future of the company, and more importantly, their future together. Later, when they returned home, Ethan and Emma were at peace, assured that they had overcome all adversity and built a relationship that would be strong enough for whatever the future brought. In his arms, Emma knew she was where she always should have been. And in his heart, Ethan knew he had finally found what he had always been looking for: someone who believed in him and who, with him, was ready to conquer the world. That night, after the closing event at Hayes Beauty, Ethan and Emma returned home with a feeling of lightness and accomplishment. The atmosphere was more than festive. It was as if finally all the pieces of their lives had fallen into place. They both knew how much they had evolved together, and each achievement, each new step taken over the last few months, was a confirmation of the commitment and strength they had built. Ethan watched her as she took off her coat and straightened her hair, still radiant from the event, and her eyes shining with emotion. He found himself lost in that moment, noticing every detail of her, every expression, the woman who had transformed his life in a way he had never thought possible. He felt his heart accelerate and a deep emotion well up, as if he finally understood that this was the time to take the next step. He would no longer need excuses, justifications, or contracts. All he wanted was her by his side, forever. Taking a deep breath, Ethan walked into the living room, where Emma was arranging some flowers he had left there earlier. He approached, nervous but determined, and gently touched her shoulder. When Emma turned to him, she was met with a look that she knew well, but that now seemed more intense than ever. She smiled, tilting her head, intrigued. "Ethan?" she said, her tone light and curious. He took her hands, holding them tenderly, and his gaze deepened, as if he was ready to confess everything he felt. "Emma, I spent so much of my life pursuing things that I thought would make me whole. First, I thought it would be control of the company, then my family's approval, and finally the plans and contracts I created to protect me from my own insecurities." She watched him, touched by the sincerity of his words, not knowing exactly what he was about to say, but feeling that every word was spoken from the heart. "But then you came into my life, and it was like everything I believed was built on a false foundation. With you, Emma, I found something I didn't even know I was looking for. I found myself. And I found what is truly love and be loved without reservation. I discovered that all these barriers, all these defenses, were unnecessary because, by your side, I can finally be who I am. Emma felt her chest heat up, her eyes filling with tears as he spoke. She held his hands tighter, realizing that the emotion on his face was as genuine as the words she was hearing. I felt in that moment that Ethan wasn't just making a promise, he was putting his whole heart into every sentence, giving himself completely to her. Emma, he continued, his voice almost a whisper, I know that we started this all so wrong and that it took me too long to realize what you really mean to me. But now I know that I want to be by your side, not for a contract, not for an agreement, but for love of everything we have built and everything we will still build. He released one of her hands and in a smooth, almost solemn movement, knelt before her. Emma's eyes widened, her heart racing as she saw him there on his knees, his eyes full of emotion. He took a ring from his pocket, a simple but incredibly beautiful piece, reflecting the soft glow of the room's light. Emma, he said, his voice trembling but firm, would you truly marry me? Would you accept being my wife, sharing a lifetime by my side, not as an agreement, but as my great love? She brought her hand to her mouth, feeling tears run down her face as she absorbed the request. The love that overflowed from his eyes was something she always knew existed, but seeing him like this, vulnerable and giving himself completely, was confirmation of everything she had wanted from the beginning. He knew that the decision was not made in a moment of impulse, but rather the result of the entire path they had traveled together. Yes, Ethan, she replied, her voice cracking with emotion. Yes, I want to be your wife. I want to be by your side for a lifetime. He smiled, his eyes shining with the same emotion as hers, and carefully placed the ring on her finger. When he got up, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her with an intensity that seemed to seal all the promises they had made that night. It was a kiss full of love, of complicity, of all the good and difficult moments that they had shared and that had led them to this point. When they pulled away, still intertwined, they both laughed, feeling joy overflowing in every look, in every touch. They sat on the sofa, side by side, and spent hours talking about the future, about the dreams they still had and how they wanted to build a life full of meaning together. A feeling of peace and completeness enveloped them, and they both knew that, after all the adversities, they had found a love that could not be shaken. Over time, they began to make plans for the wedding. The ceremony would be intimate, with only close friends and family, as what mattered to them was the essence of the commitment they were about to make. Emma took care of the decoration details, inspired by the simplicity she had always admired, while Ethan, by her side, was busy making her every request possible. During the preparations, each choice, each decision seemed to reinforce the love and partnership they had built. On the big day, Ethan waited for her at the altar, his heart racing and his mind filled with all the memories that brought them to that moment. When Emma appeared, walking towards him, he felt his heart beat with indescribable happiness. She was radiant, dressed in white, with a smile that reminded him of all the reasons he loved her. As he approached, their eyes met, and there, in front of everyone, Ethan knew that he was finally living the truest moment of his life. Emma took his hand, and the look in their eyes conveyed everything they didn't need to say in words. The vows they exchanged were brief, but full of sincerity and love. He promised, looking into her eyes, that he would never let the barriers of the past interfere with what they had built. She, in turn, promised to be by his side, facing all the challenges that still arose together, with the certainty that their love was strong enough to overcome any obstacle. As they exchanged rings, the feeling of completeness and joy enveloped them. The kiss that sealed the marriage was soft and prolonged, reflecting not only passion, but the promise of a full and shared life, where both could be themselves without reservations. Ethan felt like never before, free and loved, and he knew that, with Emma by his side, he could face whatever came his way. The reception was full of laughter and excitement. Friends and family came forward to congratulate them, and Ethan realized how everyone there now saw Emma not just as his wife, but as the woman who had won his heart and everyone's admiration. Margaret, his mother, was also present, and although Ethan knew she still harbored some reservations, he had accepted that their love was real and deserved respect. In the days following their wedding, Ethan and Emma began to shape the life they always wanted as a couple. Each morning was a silent celebration of the love they had chosen to live, each coffee shared. Each intimate conversation about the future was a reminder of what they had overcome together. At work, they continued as dedicated partners, seeking to expand Hayes Beauty, but now with an even greater purpose. They were no longer just two people fighting for a professional dream. They were a team, a unit, building something that reflected the values and love they had for each other. As time passed, their lives became richer with new achievements, moments of serenity, and even some inevitable challenges. But the love between them remained unshakable. Ethan knew that no matter what the future brought, he would never hesitate to put Emma and the relationship they built above anything else. And Emma, who had so often questioned whether she would be enough for him, now saw in every look, in every gesture, the certainty that she was the great love of his life. So side by side, Ethan and Emma continued to live the true love they found, building a home where trust, respect, and passion flourished every day. They knew that, after everything, there was nothing left to fear. They were together, exactly where they always were supposed to be, and they knew that life, with all its ups and downs, was a journey they would now take as husband and wife, forever connected by the love that faced and overcame all barriers. Ethan and Emma's wedding was just the beginning of a life full of moments that transcended all expectations. In the following months, the brilliance of the ceremony gave way to a routine where both, now husband and wife, cultivated each moment as a symbol of the love and complicity they had built. Each morning was a silent reaffirmation of the commitment they made, and the nights they spent together were filled with deep conversations and looks that said more than words could. Professional life continued at an equally vibrant pace, with Hayes Beauty flourishing under new ownership. The company has become a leader in the sustainable and innovative cosmetics sector, a reflection of Emma and Ethan's vision and love. The line of products they created together has established itself as one of the most successful, and the brand has won over new audiences with authentic campaigns based on a genuine commitment to the environment and the self-esteem of its customers. Ethan and Emma, as co-founders of that new phase, were the inspiration for the entire team. The culture at Hayes Beauty had become a reflection of everything they believed in: hard work, respect, and creativity. At company events, they became inseparable. Emma's presence, once viewed with suspicion by some, was now an essential part of the company's identity. Alongside Ethan, she was involved in meetings, discussed launches with the creative team, and presented new features with passion and intelligence. Employees saw them as a unique force, where Ethan's determination balanced with Emma's vision and sensitivity, creating a partnership that inspired and contagious. One day, at the end of a feedback meeting with the team, Ethan announced the opening of a new company initiative, a line that would revert part of the profits to reforestation projects and support communities affected by the scarcity of natural resources. Emma had been the driving force behind this idea, and he presented it to the council with a pride that was evident in every word. As the days passed, the success of Hayes Beauty's new phase seemed to expand beyond the company's walls. The couple became known for their authenticity and commitment to transforming not only their business, but their way of seeing the world. The press considered them an example of inspirational leadership and partnership, and Ethan and Emma participated in events that went far beyond the cosmetics industry, speaking about business ethics, sustainability, and innovation. Marriage also brought a new dynamic for both of them. At home, away from the responsibilities of work, they found silent peace. They shared a routine of small rituals: a candlelit dinner on Fridays, long walks on Sundays in the park close to home, and quiet evenings in which they shared their reading, laughing together, or discussing deep topics. In each of these moments, they felt the strength of the love they had built, a tranquility that came from mutual respect and admiration. Ethan, who previously carried the weight of family and professional expectations, now found himself free to live fully. Alongside Emma, he had transformed into someone more open, lighter, capable of seeing the world with less rigidity and more hope. Emma, in turn, discovered that with him, it was possible to build an authentic life where her dreams were valued and her love was reciprocated in a deep and true way. One day, while tidying up a bookshelf, Emma found an old notebook where she had made notes about her first impressions of Hayes' beauty. When she opened a page, she laughed to herself when she remembered the challenges she had faced in the first days with Ethan. When she still saw him as someone almost unreachable, he, curious, approached and read some of the notes, laughing with her as he remembered how it all started. "If someone had told me that I would end up here, married to you, after all those tense meetings and absurd contracts, I would have laughed and said it was impossible," Emma commented, laughing. Ethan hugged her from behind, his face pressed against hers, the two of them looking at the notebook as if they were reading the story of two people completely different from the ones they had become. "And I would have said it was crazy." "You were the best craziness of my life, Emma," he replied, kissing her cheek affectionately. "And if there's anything I've learned, it's that we should never underestimate the power of one person to completely transform how we thought about love and ourselves." His words made her smile, and she closed the notebook, keeping it fondly, as a symbol of the beginning of the journey that had led them here. "Deep down, I knew that true happiness came from accepting others as they were, with their flaws and qualities, and they had both learned this deeply." Time passed, and life together expanded beyond professional dreams. Emma and Ethan began to imagine a future where they could share this happiness in other ways. Between short trips, events, and quiet afternoons at home, they started talking about the idea of building a family. Ethan, who previously avoided discussions about the future for fear of losing control, now spoke openly about his desires, sharing his plans and fears with her, while Emma listened with attention and affection, always ready to support him. One starry night, during a trip to a cabin in the mountains, Ethan and Emma sat in silence, watching the illuminated sky. With their hands clasped together, Ethan turned to her, his expression serious but serene. "Emma, I know the road here has been long and not always easy, but if there's one thing I've learned from you, it's that the best moments in life come when we least expect them. And I think I'm ready to take the next step. Maybe it's time to think about expanding our family." Emma looked at him, surprised and excited. His face reflected the tranquility of someone who had finally found a home not in a place, but in a person. She smiled, feeling her heart speed up. "I knew they were ready for this new phase, and that, regardless of the challenges, they would face everything together, with the same strength and love that got them there." Upon returning to New York, they began to plan their lives with new dreams, now with the certainty that, together, they could build anything. The company, new projects, and life together were a constant source of fulfillment, and they both knew that the future held lasting and authentic happiness for them. Emma and Ethan had overcome their barriers and became more than lovers, more than business partners. They were, above all, companions for life. Over the years, Ethan and Emma never stopped celebrating each achievement and supporting each other through each challenge. When their first child was born, their happiness seemed to overflow, and the little one became the personification of the love that had brought them together. The baby brought a new dynamic to the couple's lives, a routine of challenges and discoveries that only strengthened their love. Ethan, who previously lived for work and responsibilities, now discovered the joy of taking care of a new life, sharing sleepless nights and first words with Emma. What about Hayes Beauty? The company continued to grow under the couple's inspired leadership, gaining international recognition for its innovation and commitment to authentic values. The legacy they built together was not limited to the brand. It was a story of love and dedication that defined them as professionals and as a family. Ethan and Emma have become known not only as entrepreneurs, but as an example that true success is finding those who truly transform us and allow us to be the best version of ourselves. In the following years, they continued side by side, celebrating each moment, building a story that would be told to their children and grandchildren as a true proof of love and courage. Ethan and Emma had found in each other the answer to all the questions they had always carried in their hearts. Their love, which had begun so improbably, had blossomed into something that transcended time and obstacles. And together, they knew they could face anything, because the greatest treasure they had was the true love they shared and the full life that, every day, they built together with respect, affection, and unconditional companionship.